Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 7230. Gloriana's Shame. Chapter 7230. Gloriana's Shame. This is awful, Gloriana said as she grew more and more queasy. When I designed the Riot Mark III, I never meant for this to happen. Living mechs are not supposed to be punished for the mistakes of their pilots. It is not the Riot's fault that Venerable Orphan has failed to break through up until this point. If she wants to become an ace pilot so badly, then she should first look into herself before obsessing over her mech. VS let out a sigh. I get where you are coming from, honey, but I do not think this is a bad development. No matter who wins or loses, the fact that two spirits had to compete against each other in a ritualistic deathmatch will only further imbue our work with chaos and conflict. I can tell that the living mech likes it. A long time ago, I let the mech frame absorb an unstable chaos essence gem. This is the starting point of the Riot Mark III degeneration. Everything that has happened since that point has ultimately led to this situation. His wife frowned for a moment. Are you saying that the Riot was destined to fall like an angel being cast down from heaven into hell? Not so dramatic, but yes, that is roughly what I am saying. The Riot Mark II was a fine mech, but he was only chaotic in a half-hearted fashion. I was limited by the available methods and materials that I had access to at the time. Enough years have passed for me to make up for these shortcomings. The Mark III upgrade is finally able to bring my true vision to life. The current iteration of the Riot is finally on the cusp where he can finally embrace his true nature. Or lose everything. Yes, the silent but intense struggle for dominance continued. The intruder may be a complete stranger in the Riot Mark III, but he was a middle demon who had fought and devoured dozens of his peers through successive goo cultivation rituals. There was no way the Prophet's Bane would give up after suffering a single setback. The Riot Mark III suddenly changed. The mech frame did not develop any weird spikes or exaggerated angles, but VS could nonetheless sense that one of the machine's shoulder plates had become subtly wrong. When he focused his gaze at it, he had the illusion that it was a millimeter short in one moment, and several millimeters too long in the next moment. The mass, the dimensions, the angles, and even the way the light reflected from its surface constantly shifted in a manner that was unnoticeable to most people. To VS, it felt as if he was looking at an optical illusion, but he knew that this was not exactly false. He had a strong feeling that what he was seeing was a manifestation of probability manipulation that directly altered reality. The phenomenon initially confined itself to the shoulder plate, but it was steadily spreading outwards like a virus. The chest plating, arm plating, and other parts gradually began to exhibit the same phenomenon. The effects remained subtle, but even laymen would instinctively be able to sense that something about the Riot Mark III was wrong. Even his wife could not ignore this subtle but disturbing sight. Is this contamination? VS nodded. I guess so. Not every form of demonic contamination produces wicked spikes and so on. The choice of demon-casting molds is a big factor. This one does not seek to empower anything directly related to combat or physical attributes. The mold that I have chosen is solely designed to strengthen a mech's relation to prophecy. The mold works very differently from the other ones I have used so far. While it is a pity to filter out the properties of the demon that is good at direct offense and such, I kind of like this subtle directional improvement more. It is very focused, and it is doing a good job of amplifying the properties that will make the Riot Mark III unique. He cared a lot about creating unique mechs. It was hard to create any machine that stood out and became iconic throughout the generations. There were just too many mech designers out there. Their combined output was massive even if VS limited his consideration to the mech industry of the Red Ocean. All of the normal ideas had already been tried out, so if he wanted to create a truly unique and unforgettable mech, it could only be done by resorting to radical deviations. The corruption continued to spread. The Prophet's Bane was no idiot. It had fought against so many powerful peers that the living mech did not discourage it in the slightest. Despite its feral, irrational state, the molded demon did not crash directly into its adversary. Instead, the Prophet's Bane instinctively understood that it was better to dig in and capture ground step by step. It focused all of its energy into conquering the shoulder plating first. The concentration of power was enough to overcome the living mech's resistance. From there, the Prophet's Bane was able to rely on its initial foothold to expand its territory. This strategy of gradual assimilation prevented the living mech from making full use of its home ground. The more territory got eroded, the less powerful the living mech became. In the end, The outcome of this competition was already set since the moment the defender lost his first piece of territory. The Prophet's Bane was inexhaustible. It had put in a huge amount of effort to conquer the first few territories, but after its opponent gradually started to weaken, its advantage continued to snowball. When more and more of the mech frame began to show the same signs of subtle incongruity, both VS and Gloriana knew that the takeover was almost over. Venerable Orphan's battle partner had put up a valiant fight, but it was ultimately unable to defend itself against a powerful demonic invader that had been strengthened numerous times. If the Riot Mark III was already an ace mech that had undergone substantial amounts of willpower baptism, then the outcome might have been completely different. Alas, the Riot Mark III was only the companion of a high-ranking mech pilot of the first major cultivation rank. In the face of Middle Demon that corresponded to the second major cultivation rank, it was unable to make use of his home ground advantages to prove he was worthy enough to remain alive. The Riot Mark III began to settle down as the Prophet's Bane claimed the spoils of his righteous victory. It began to absorb and assimilate as many pieces of the original living mech as possible. However, this did not entirely go smoothly. The defeated spirit possessed a notable affinity for chaos. When the Prophet's Bane inherited this trait among others, the victor experienced a growing degree of discomfort as numerous opposing attributes began to war against each other. The Prophet's Bane had become an existence of opposing attributes and concepts. It was unable to reconcile the new with the old and began to suffer for this reason. As the Prophet's Bane suffered the punishment for its gluttonous appetite, VS and Gloriana continued to monitor the condition of the Riot Mark III. A living mech got murdered today, Gloriana flatly said. The Riot accompanied Venerable Rosa Orphan for multiple years. He had grown alongside his battle partner through multiple important battles. They were both comrades in arms. Even if we did not have a good use for him anymore, he at least deserved a peaceful retirement. Instead, you threw him to a big bad wolf. Are you happy with this, VS? He smiled. I am. I think you are deliberately overlooking the fact that the Riot consented to this treatment. Like pilot, like mech. The living mech wants to become stronger in order to serve his battle partner better. He has already accepted that if he is not up to par, then he would accept an outcome where his competitor took over the mech frame and became Venerable Orphan's new battle partner. No matter how this competition would end, the pilot would always gain the better partner. All I can say is that the Riot is truly dedicated to his partner to be willing to disregard his own life and continued existence. I really cannot understand how you can talk yourself into such a twisted outcome. This is still wrong. You should not have to sacrifice any life, no matter whether it is a human or a living mech, to develop superior mechs. Even if all of these evil methods are effective, we cannot become over-reliant on them to the point where we have forgotten how to design mechs that are strong without making use of blood sacrifices or soul devouring. His wife made a good point. VS was making use of unconventional solutions to develop mechs that were substantially stronger and more effective than what he could normally produce. Results were important, but mech designers generally valued the processes more. After the Prophet's Bane had become the undeniable victor and spiritual counterpart of the Riot Mark III, the D-Mech had reached its final form. The machine seemed to transform in a subtle but different way than before. Both VS and Gloriana immediately recognized it as a masterwork transformation. The problem was that this was happening on a demonic mech. The subtle distortion effect generated by the Prophet's Bane blended with the effects of the masterwork transformation, causing many changes that should have improved the overall quality of the expert mech to appear slightly skewed. It was like looking at a funhouse version of a masterwork transformation. The distortions caused perfections to look flawed, and imperfections to look even more ridiculous. VS all found it to be an incredibly novel sight, but his wife had a completely different reaction. I think I am going to be sick. Gloriana was abhorred by what was happening. The masterwork transformation applied to a mech that embodied the concepts of chaos and misdirection generated the most unusual sight that she had ever seen. The Riot Mark III was supposed to be the 12th masterwork mech that she had brought into life, but she feared that after witnessing this horrendous sight, she would never be able to bring herself to claim credit for this work. At this point, she did not even desire the masterwork certificate for this abominable machine. To call it a masterwork was a mockery as the machine's strengthened chaotic nature tried its best to turn itself back into a flawed state. Once the masterwork transformation finally came to an end, both of them knew that the Riot Mark III had finally reached its final form. It is amazing. VS sighed with genuine appreciation. I know you don't share my opinion, but this is a significant advancement of my design philosophy. I have experimented with the concept of designing an adversarial living mech in the past, but those were weak and half-hearted attempts. The Riot Mark III is the first instance where I think I can truly make this concept show its value and succeed. Venerable Orphan will not have a pleasant time when piloting this machine, but so long as her willpower is strong enough, she will gain far more advantages than disadvantages from piloting her reinvented steed. The Riot Mark III was the most radical upgrade yet applied to any high-ranking living mech of the Larkinson clan. The latest transformations of other fine machines such as the Dark Zephyr Mark III, the Amaranto Mark III, the Minerva Mark II and even the First Sword Mark III could not compare to the gulf between the Riot Mark II and the Mark III. This had wide implications for other upgrade candidates. I hope you are not thinking about turning all of our future high-ranking mechs into D-mechs, Gloriana said with a slightly pleading tone. VS briefly reigned in his ecstasy and enthusiasm. Don't worry, I haven't lost my sanity. The product has to fit the user. I know that most mech pilots are not asking for an adversarial living mech. I will strictly reserve this design application for those who lack confidence in themselves and do not have the patience to build up their strength over a longer period of time. Chapter 7231. The completion of the first D-mech. After the pair of mech designers beheld their first D-mech, they waited in silence for a time. Gloriana looked as if she was struggling to decide whether to cut all of her ties to the corrupted masterwork expert mech. She seriously thought about withdrawing from all future obligations to the machine, which mainly entailed conducting repairs and upgrading the D-mech in the future. The original Riot Mark III presented by the mech design was still an acceptable product despite its many eccentricities. The new Riot Mark III that had undergone demon casting turned into a completely different beast that she could not recognize anymore. She refused to admit that this monstrosity could ever serve as the perfect vessel for its intended pilot. Gloriana strongly believed that there should have been a better way to meet the needs of Venerable Rosa Orphan. If she was a better mech designer, then she should have been able to design an excellent high-tier expert mech that could give Venerable Orphan the confidence she needed to stimulate her breakthrough. Unfortunately, she couldn't. Gloriana recognized that she had yet to reach this level. She could only work together with her husband and rely on his Class 9 design philosophy to make up for her shortcomings. This would not last forever. Once she became strong enough to design powerful enough mechs by herself, she would no longer have to tolerate her husband's antics without having the ability to object. She looked forward to realizing this future. As for now, the only thing she could do was hold in her disapproval and make the best out of a bad situation. Strange. What is it, Gloriana? The physical mutations of the Riot Mark III are much less severe than your previously made D-arms. Not only that, but it is also manifesting in a drastically different manner. There are no weird spikes. It actually still looks close enough to the original design. If not for the constant subtle distortion effect, I wouldn't have been able to recognize it as a D-mech in the first place. Why do you think this is the case? VS had already been thinking about this mystery. I have several possible explanations. For one, unlike the attack and defense enhancement demon casting molds, the prophecy imbuement demon casting mold works very differently. The former two take any form of useful energy and sloppily channels that into broad enhancements. The latter is more selective and precise. The prophecy-oriented mold cuts out a lot more pollution, which means that there is much less spare energy left to produce questionable and unproductive mutations. That sounded like a decent explanation, but Gloriana was not entirely convinced. Another possible explanation is that the use of a much more powerful middle demon may have increased the efficiency of the demon casting process. It could also be that the Prophet's Bane simply hates the Riot Mark III to the point it does not even desire to corrupt the mech in its entirety. It may also be that the fight between the Prophet's Bane and the original living mech has prevented the former from wasting its energy on useless mutations. A final explanation may be that as the Prophet's Bane won the contest of dominion and devoured the essence of the living mech, it has achieved a relatively perfect fit with the mech frame, thereby making further mutations redundant. Who knows what the real answer may be? Multiple reasons may be valid. VS truly did not know the answers. There were too many possibilities for him to consider. Lack of data and proof prevented him from figuring out the truth. It didn't matter. VS was not obsessed over controlling the physical mutations triggered by demon casting. The main lesson he derived from this attempt was that demon casting did not always result in an object growing sharp and mean-looking spikes. Their physical transformations could be a lot subtler and low-key. The latest outcome was pretty much close to the ideal that VS tried to attain when it came to demon casting. He wanted the physical transformations to be as minimal and restrained as possible. Doing this would not only make it harder for enemies to recognize the telltale characteristic of D-mechs and D-arms, but also prevent enemies from purposefully hunting them down. I need to experiment more with the prophecy imbuement demon casting mold, VS said with growing determination. I think that my theory that examined the broad applicability of the more general mold and the tighter focus of more specialized mold is true. I had my doubts about whether I came close to the truth, but no more. This outcome already explains much. It at least gives me hope that not all of my D-mechs and D-arms have to come in the form of evil-looking products that are covered with self-harming spikes. That was a big relief. VS did not want his work to become defined by this provocative visual style. He quite liked the demonic manifestation on the Riot Mark III. could still pass off as a normal mech. At most, people who observed the machine directly would feel as if the machine was under the influence of a powerful jamming or interference field. The enemies who fought against the Riot Mark III in person would eventually discover that the strange distortions were not just cosmetic. Gloriana glanced at her husband. "Are you waiting for something to happen?" "You look as if you are hesitating on whether to approach the completed mech." VS responded with a sardonic smile. "To be honest, you are right. I was waiting to see if a lightning storm would form above our heads. It wouldn't be the first time the heavenly authorities responded this way whenever I created a work that is boundary breaking. I still do not understand the conditions which can trigger this response. Does my work have to exceed a power threshold or violate fundamental taboos? I have no idea. I was 60% certain that all of the stuff I have done to the Riot Mark III merits a lightning tribulation, but nothing. Perhaps it is because the effects of demon casting are not significant enough. Yet, Gloriana theorized, the heavens will not be able to ignore your works once you are able to produce better results. Another theory is that this demon casting forge is somehow able to drastically reduce the occurrence of lightning tribulations. I can imagine that this may have been built into the facility in order to prevent the demonic artifacts from encountering their nemesis in the form of tribulation lightning. The latter theory sounded more plausible than the former, but they had no proof that either of them were true. Well, if it hasn't happened now, it probably won't happen at all for this iteration, VS said as he relaxed his tense muscles. You sound disappointed. I suppose I am. Although lightning tribulations are troublesome, I am still incredibly confident in our work. You know how much damage it can withstand with the help of its full superdimensional archemetal energized armor system. The insanely powerful defenses should be more than enough to compensate for a demonic artifact's inherent vulnerability against tribulation lightning. So long as the Riot Mark III passes this test, it will automatically grow stronger and more exceptional, just as is the case for the Dominion of Man. Perhaps the heavens understood his underlying motivations, because they had withheld their tribulation lightning this time. What a bummer. VS and Gloriana cautiously approached and began to inspect the Riot Mark III. They still kept the finished DMech restrained, not trusting it to remain dormant after the Prophet's Bane had settled into its new home. Up close, the sense of disturbance grew a lot stronger. It was as if VS and Gloriana had approached a part of space that suffered from crazy glitches. Their vision grew confused. Their sense of gravity and balance became disturbed. The mech sometimes appeared close and the next time further away. Both of them shuddered. I hope this is the last time you create a mech that just feels wrong up close. Gloriana grumbled. The Riot Mark III has become unnatural. I have a growing impression that it does not deserve to exist at all. I never get this feeling with other mechs, even ones that I would rather wish they had never been designed. I truly feel that the Riot Mark III has broken one too many boundaries. The Riot Mark II most certainly broke limits, some less acceptable than others. Its existence would most certainly cause the parts of the Red Association to complain. This would especially be the case if Venerable Orphan's life came under serious threat. The more her life became impacted by bonding to an actively hostile and dangerous machine, the greater the backlash from the mech community. The Riot Mark III openly defied the principles that had ensured that mech pilots could unquestionably trust the products developed by mech designers across multiple centuries. Yet now that VS had brought this unprecedented DMech to life, he may have started a trend that would not lead to any condemnation by mech pilots across the Red Ocean. Instead, they may actually adopt mentalities similar to Venerable Orphan and believe that his so-called adversarial mechs may actually be the best way to promote their breakthroughs. VS did not dare to go too far and make such a bold claim. He most definitely believed that more mech pilots could benefit from piloting such a machine, but he was not about to design a mass-market version and endanger millions of customers who had overestimated their capabilities. Besides, he doubted that he could mass-produce such mechs in the first place considering they needed to be democasted with at least minor demons. While it was technically possible to mass-produce demechs, the supply of minor demons was not free. Helena needed to work hard to gather a huge amount of souls and convert them into minor demons. VS did not have the heart to ask his eldest sister to labor so much on his behalf. It would be better if he came up with an apparatus that could automate this process, but that was a whole other thing. So what do you think, VS? Will the Riot Mark III successfully stimulate Rosa Orphan's breakthrough? Will she be able to tame this machine? Or will this be the first DMech that has also claimed its intended user? I literally cannot predict that, honey. He replied in an exasperated tone. There are too many unknown variables in play. It is up to Venerable Orphan to confront these risks and prove she can vanquish them. If she can break through and become powerful enough to tame the Riot, I am confident that she can become a more powerful presence on the battlefield than Saint Dice. She might not have access to a superdimensional weapon as of yet, but I expect that she can attain such great synergy with the Tier 3 Destroyer Spear that her lethality will not be much worse. The first Sword Mark III served as the benchmark for all junior ace mechs with full superdimensional conversion as far as VS was concerned. All of the superdimensional ace mechs that he designed after Ketty's released her latest Pride and Joy had to perform better than the now iconic Ace Swordsman mech, or else VS had wasted much of his time. He knew it would be another challenge for the Venerable Orphan and the Riot Mark III to beat their old rivals, but VS had given them conditions necessary to make this happen. It would be disappointing if they ultimately failed to live up to the amazing potential of their combination. Gloriana held a complex expression as she gazed at the completed mech. I hope that you can get what you want from this D-mech. It is the first of its kind, so it would be a shame if it ended up tarnishing your career. The RA will crucify you if the worst comes to pass. I think I will be able to manage Gloriana. The RA is not as closed-minded as the MTA. The evolution which understands my intentions. So long as she is backing me up, I will be fine. Chapter 7232. Confronting the Demon. The fateful time had come. After converting the Riot Mark III into a D-mech, VS and Gloriana exited the system space and brought the machine back into reality. When Venerable Rosa Orphan finally had an opportunity to glimpse at her destined machine for the first time, she fell completely silent. Her body remained frozen while she beheld the magnitude of what her battle partner had become. Nobody who was still present interrupted her. They gave her all the time she needed to process the culmination of the miracle couple's work. The technical specifications of the Riot Mark III were impressive and could easily give the first Sword Mark III a run for her money. The additional enhancements brought about by the demon casting process should have elevated all of her parameters by varying degrees. It was impossible for the mech designers to estimate how much stronger it had become. Part of the reason why it was impossible to figure out was because of the odd workings of the Prophecy Imbuement demon casting mold. Unlike the other molds that VS had used in the past, this one channeled much of a demon's power into enhancing very specific metaphysical properties of the target object. This meant that any increases in strength, speed, and toughness should be a lot less dramatic. VS did not regret this outcome. He never designed the Riot Mark III to function as a physically superior fighting machine. It only needed to be powerful enough to make full use of its more esoteric advantages. Venerable Rosa Orphan certainly looked amazed. The mech that appeared fundamentally wrong, flawed or broken to most people made a very different impression to the pilot who was meant to make use of it in battle. It is more than what I imagined in my dreams. She eventually broke her silence. It has a very different feel than before. My battle partner is gone, isn't he? I have piloted the Mark II for multiple years. I know every detail of him. Even outside of the cockpit, I can still feel where he is and what his mood is. It is similar to my long-standing bonds with Dice and Janzi. However, this time, I get the unmistakable feeling that I am looking at a stranger who is wearing the skin of my old battle partner. VS slowly nodded. Your senses have not deceived you. When we performed the final process, your old battle partner fought to the death against a much more powerful foreign invader. The latter has won the contest and has claimed much of the former. The Prophet's Bane, as we have taken to calling the winner, has settled into your new machine. Congratulations, Rosa. The Riot Mark III is officially the first adversarial mech of its kind. It is a machine that exists to test and challenge its own mech pilot. Either you dominate your machine, or it will dominate you in turn. His words might sound like a nightmare to any normal pilot, especially one of the Larkinson clan. The soldiers of the clansmen had been taught to respect, honor, and even love their battle partners. Their mechs were alive and possessed the capacity for intelligent thought comparable to humans once they evolved into third-order living mechs. The Larkinson clan currently had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of living mechs among their ranks, of which the vast majority had already turned into third-order living mechs a long time ago. Each of them had spent months and years interacting with humans. All of this socialization had caused many new friendships to form between humans and their living machines. This phenomena had practically become embedded into the culture of the Larkinson clan. Therefore, what VS had done to the Riot Mark III most definitely ran counter to this benign development. Fortunately, Venerable Orphan understood. I had hoped that he would be able to accompany me into future battlefields. But his sacrifice shall not be in vain, she slowly said. He knew the risks. He decided on his own to undergo a similar test as my own. I do not regret that he lost. He simply did not have what it took to help me become stronger at the pace I want. I hope this Prophet's Bane has absorbed all he needed from my old partner. The more familiar he or it has become with his new home, the better. I need my machine running in top form in order to fight the enemies of tomorrow. Perhaps others might find it callous that Venerable Orphan dismissed the death of a living personality so easily. The living mech that she had partnered up with for so long had died in a terrible circumstance. He could have gone on to live for many more years, serving as the indispensable partner and comrade in arms of Rosa Orphan. Alas, it was not to be. The living mech had fallen, and another entity had taken its place. As Venerable Orphan stared at the dormant D-Mech in the distance, the D-Mech stared back. VS had no doubt that the two were measuring each other up. The Prophet's Bane had grown so powerful and violent that it would never willingly submit to another, especially a human who sought to subjugate it for the purpose of leveraging its power on the battlefield. Before he allowed Venerable Orphan to interface with her machine for the first time, he gave her a final briefing. I have inspected the Carmine system as thoroughly as I could, which is not as impressive as it sounds, as the riot's strange properties makes it difficult to scan its interior. The internal diagnostics all report that the components of the Carmine system are still in order. Whether that data is trustworthy remains to be seen, but I think that the most recent transformation has not fundamentally broken it. The greater concern is whether the Carmine system has become corrupted. I have tried my best to verify that it is still safe to use, but I cannot give you a 100% guarantee. There is a small chance that it may poison you on a biological level. The good news is that I am not too afraid that it will harm your spirit, because your extraordinary willpower should be able to resist such influences. Venerable Orphan did not look too concerned. When I become an ace pilot, my Saint Kingdom will become powerful enough to reinforce my body and neutralize the dangers of my own machine. If not when. VS warned her. Confidence is good, but no outcome is certain. Otherwise, we wouldn't be treating this situation so seriously. This is the last window of opportunity for you to reconsider and back out. I know you don't want to think about it, but please take this seriously. Do you agree to participate in this dangerous experiment and serve as the test pilot of the first adversarial mech that I have brought into existence? The expert pilot grinned as her fighting spirit only grew stronger after being questioned. You don't need to ask any further. I am in. You don't need to feel responsible if I fail. Just like my old battle partner, if the Prophet's Bane has overpowered me, then that just proves that I am not ace pilot material. I would rather end my suffering quickly and die than to linger on for several decades while my progress remains frozen. I am envious, VS. I am jealous of Tusa, Stark, Dice and Casella for being able to continue growing stronger, while I am left out in the cold. This will hopefully change by the end of the day. She stepped forward. VS accompanied her but remained on guard. His wife and Alexa had already activated numerous safeguards and were currently in the process of installing additional restraints. They had even thought about deliberately sabotaging the mech so that it could not move, but they ultimately decided against it for fear of botching Venerable Orphan's possible breakthrough. They would just have to put their faith in other safeguards. As Venerable Orphan stepped close to the machine, both sides remained dormant. The Prophet's Bane appeared relatively calm, though it was hard to tell what it was doing considering its amorphous nature. The true contest would only begin once the pilot attempted to interface with the D-Mech. By then, the democasted entity gained a chance to connect with a powerful expert pilot and gain an opportunity to come back to life. It all hinged on whether Rosa Orphan was able to muster the strength and will to unlock her greater potential. VS placed his hand on her shoulder. Good luck. We have done our jobs. Now it is your turn. I am counting on you to overcome this challenge and gain control of the Riot Mark III. Once you succeed, you shall be assigned to the Blue Jay Fleet and fight against the enemies of Red Humanity. There are a lot of good fights in store. We may have taken on 30 ascended giants, but there are enemies that only you can defeat. Venerable Orphan's heart swelled with hope. If your mech can help me make the jump, then I will gladly put myself in your service. My spear shall be yours. She ascended to the entrance of the cockpit. She already changed into her custom superdimensional alloy piloting suit. It featured special orifices that would allow the suit to form a complete connection with the Carmine system of the Riot Mark III. VS and the others retreated to an adjacent control room. They began to man the workstations and began the preparations for the first test. They first inspected and activated all of the precautionary safety measures. VS even called over a squad of ascended giants who were currently waiting outside in their human forms. Check the energy cells. They are at 10% charge, right? Correct, sir. No more, no less. The Riot Mark III did not need to expend as much power in the first activation. If it ever went out of control and managed to overcome all of the safety measures, then it would run out of energy pretty quickly. There was a chance that Venerable Orphan needed more time to win her contest of dominance against the Prophet's Bane, but if that was the case, then she was not truly ready anyway. She needed to secure a quick victory. The nearly empty power reserves became another source of pressure to her. If she ended up in a stalemate against the powerful D-Mech, then that was as good as failure. After completing the final checks, VS and his wife exchanged one more deep glance before focusing on their job. Begin. The Riot Mark III slowly began to activate. The machine performed the mandatory initial checks, which meant that the first startup process would take a long time to run its course. Even as the expert spearman mech slowly roused to activity, Venerable Orphan began to hiss as she felt needles poking into her body. Foreign blood circulated in her bloodstream while her native blood entered the artificial veins of the Carmine system. Both Mech and Mech Pilot exchanged their blood with each other. This crude ritual exchange started a mystical process that brought the two together on a level that went beyond the material realm. A sense of weight and gravity descended into the chamber and control room as those present understood that history was being made here. The very first D-Mech and adversarial Mech was about to put its pilot to the test. Mro! Blinky emerged out of V's head and used his excellent senses to observe the initial contact. The willpower of Venerable Rosa Orphan did not collide directly against the Prophet's bane. Both sides exercised an unusual degree of restraint. Seconds passed in relative stillness as the Riot Mark III continued to test and confirm that all of its components and systems were in order. It was only when the machine neared the end of its extensive self-checking cycle that the Prophet's bane finally made its move. The eyes of the newly completed mech shone in ominous red as the unwilling artifact spirit surged towards its pilot and attempted to destroy her like it had done to many other demons. It is starting. Chapter 7233, Rosa Orphans a Besson. Chapter 7233, Rosa Orphans a Besson. What did it take for mech pilots to break past their limitations? Nobody could tell the exact parameters. The answer was most certainly deep and multifaceted. Perhaps it was futile to even explain it with limited human words. Mech pilots therefore came up with their own answers. None of them sounded perfectly satisfying, but they did the job more or less. Some of them claimed that they needed to possess greater guts and courage than 99.9999% of their peers in order to trigger their breakthroughs. Others believed that they needed to excel in terms of skills in order to have a shot of becoming high-ranking mech pilots. A big group believed that conviction and fighting for the right cause without reservation was the decisive factor. There was another large group that believed that none of this mattered unless their mechs were better than anyone else's. Of course, there were also plenty of mech pilots who recognized and understood the importance of all of these criteria. They recognized that transcending their mortality as mech pilots was an uphill battle that could only be won by a distressingly small group of exemplars who ticked most if not all of the boxes. The bar was set so high that it was unimaginable for anyone normal to even have a chance. Perhaps that was the point. Expert pilots were so exceptional in so many areas that only the most extreme and dedicated among the class of mech pilots successfully proved their worth. Then what about ace pilots? As the rank that existed between expert pilots and god pilots, the standards of becoming a saint were even more demanding. This was already enough reasons for many mech pilots to despair. Just becoming an expert pilot was a difficult and demanding endeavor. Since the age of mechs, an endless amount of potentates strove to break past their limits and ascend with the help of their machines. Yet almost every one of them failed. Success cases were so rare that they were deemed outliers more than anything. People like Avatar Commander Melker Larkinson worked so hard over the years, yet he had never caught up to the likes of his other true-blood cousins such as Venerable Janzi Larkinson or St. Tusa Billingsley Larkinson. To pilots like him, meeting the conditions to become an expert candidate was already enough to feel like they have satisfied their life's purpose. It was even more unimaginable for them to achieve sainthood. Just the very words used to describe ace pilots was enough to understand that only the best and most exemplary among expert pilots had a chance of triggering a second apotheosis. No expert pilot assumed that becoming an ace pilot was a breeze. Just because they proved to be best among purely mortal mech pilots did not mean they were entitled to achieve sainthood. To become a saint was to rank in the top 1% or 0.1% of all expert pilots. This was already an insanely tall order because expert pilots were already excellent by definition. Even if they were not that remarkable as standard mech pilots or expert candidates, the changes wrought by apotheosis never failed to turn mortals into demigods who were worthy to be called this way. Each expert pilot had transcended the boundaries of the physical universe and gained a small amount of dominion over the divine. Compared to actual saints, expert pilots were like children who only got to pretend to be a god. The difference in capabilities between the two was too vast. It was enough to make most expert pilots that they were not even close to reaching the pinnacle of what they could possibly attain. Expert pilots were more like up-jumped mortals while ace pilots started to grasp the shadow of divinity. The power of a god was too much to wield by mere mortal humans. Therefore, Venerable Rosa Orphan had always been fairly clear that she could not rest on her laurels. Any pride she held for becoming an expert pilot had long disappeared as she continued to struggle with her bottleneck. To be honest, she recognized that she was not entirely normal with her obsession. Most expert pilots spent a lot more decades building up their skills and proving their worthiness in battle. They fought alongside other soldiers and participated in conflicts that mattered to their state and the people they protected. Mech pilots generally understood that engaging in all of these activities brought expert pilots closer and closer to triggering their next apotheosis. This was how expert pilots normally achieved sainthood. They approached it like a marathon and focused on making consistent gains over a longer period of time. Patriarch Reginald Cross of the Cross clan was considered to be an excellent example as he had struggled until he was almost ready to celebrate his 80th birthday before he finally achieved his sainthood. It seemed ridiculous for Venerable Rosa Orphan to feel disappointed in herself for not being able to do the same thing despite the fact that she was a full generation younger. The difference was that Rosa knew that her circumstances were much better than normal. Unlike the vast majority of mech pilots, she happened to be a part of the Larkinson clan. The clan offered excellent conditions that were much more conducive to breakthroughs. For example, the frequency of combat was much higher. The Larkinsons already fought plenty of battles where the survival of their clan or fleet hinged on a decisive engagement. Living mechs offered better breakthrough conditions than normal. Mech pilots had no way to explain why this was the case, but they pretty much knew that they were lucky to pilot third-order living mechs that were intelligent and caring beyond any other machines they used. Combined with a highly supportive and understanding mech designer and patriarch, those who caught his attention and earned his favor had benefited greatly from his custom works. The Riot Mark II may be an outdated low-tier expert mech, but it already offered good enough conditions for Venerable Rosa Orphan to ascend into sainthood. Then why did she fail? Mech pilots who belonged to the same generation as her such as Venerable Dice managed to make the jump while piloting the equally outdated First Sword Mark II. The limitations did not appear to have fazed Dice in the slightest. Instead, she took it as another challenge and reveled in her attempts to overcome the physical limitations of her rapidly aging machine. Rosa had always considered herself to be an equal to Dice. Sure, they were very different mech pilots with very different backgrounds, but in terms of pure piloting, they belonged to the same generation and shared very similar conditions now that they had both become champions of the Larkinson clan. Yet whereas Dice had already taken a step closer to earning her godhood and began to pilot the first full superdimensional ace mech, Rosa had remained stuck without any sign of budging. Her desperation even caused the Riot Mark II to suffer a crippling injury and put herself out of commission for a time, making it even harder to replicate Dice's feat. While Rosa could barely accept the fact that she was bested by a member of the same generation or slightly older such as Dice or Devia Stark, she was not as willing to accept she was inferior to the members of the younger generations. She did not know how, but while enjoying the same luxurious conditions in the Larkinson clan, youngsters such as Tusa Billingsley Larkinson, Casella Ingvar and Isabel Coton all managed to undergo their second apotheosis. Their youth combined with the very short amount of time they spent as ace pilot candidates apparently did not hinder them too much. While a kid like Tusa could at least attribute much of his breakthrough to piloting the amazing Dark Zephyr Mark III for the first time, what about the likes of Casella and Isabel? They were still piloting the slightly more modern but still quite weak and outdated Mark I versions of their respective expert mechs. Their conditions were almost as bad as that as Venerable Dice, but they did not let this inconvenient variable stand in their way of developing their own saint kingdoms. That was what truly put Rosa Orphan in a bad mood. Being bested by younger and less experienced mech pilots made her feel as if she was simply not good enough. No matter how much she tried to celebrate her own accomplishment, she felt like a fool whenever she thought about those younger ace pilots. You are pathetic, you know that, Rosa? Age is not as important as courage and conviction. There are ace pilots who broke through at an even younger age than Tusa, but also late bloomers who only managed to earn their sainthood in their second century of life. I know, Dice. I just can't help it. I cannot stop myself from comparing my qualifications to that of others. The powerful and unshakable form of Venerable Dice stepped forward in an unrecognizable starry landscape. She continued to step forward on an invisible platform until she stopped right in front of Rosa. The postures of the two couldn't be more different. The actual ace pilot's spine remained straight while her eyes conveyed her formidable amount of willpower. Just a single glance was enough for Rosa to feel suppressed. Her intuition told her that she was in the presence of a higher and much more superior life form. Rosa felt as if she was a fraud in front of her close friend. Dice had successfully taken the next step like an indomitable swordswoman while Rosa stumbled like a drunken pig. She lowered her head. Her shame grew when she still considered herself to be a friend of Dice. Just like how demigods no longer interacted with mortals all that much, saints had become so transcendently powerful that it was beyond awkward for them to continue to interact with the former on a frequent basis. There was a natural hierarchy between the two. Both of them possessed excellent intuitions, so they were quite clear of the vast gulf in strength between their groups. As much as Rosa hated it, there was no way to sustain the same relationship across a major gap in rank. The only exception may be the Saint Commander, but that was mostly because Casella had become the Larkinson matriarch, thereby forcing her to interact with mortals in order to lead the clan. Other than that, ace pilots tended to spend time in their own circle. If they had to talk to their lessers, then there was always a sense of hierarchy. Saint Dice crossed her arms as she continued to gaze at Rosa with her judgmental gaze. The force of her saint kingdom and her conviction made it clear that she despised weakness in herself and others. I have told you before that your obsession with comparing yourself to others will be your doom, the ace pilot stated. Age is not as important as you think. So what if younger pilots such as Tusa and Isabel managed to become my peers? They deserve it. They worked hard and performed well on the battlefield. Their skills are excellent and their convictions are sincere enough. More importantly, they are not prone to feeling inferior to anyone. Only you are engaged in constant comparisons with your betters. Do you know what this says about you, Rosa? No. Your behavior indicates that you are affected by a deep sense of insecurity. You fundamentally lack confidence in yourself. Just because you are not the first ace pilot of the Larkinson clan, you immediately assume that you are trash. You have tried hard to get rid of this assumption, but your lack of progress has made that impossible, for you directly equate your worth to your rank. Since when has becoming an expert pilot shameful? You are still a hero and champion to the Larkinsons. It doesn't matter, Rosa cried out. The main reason I got here is because I freeloaded off the Larkinsons. I admit it, okay. My strength did not have much to do with how I managed to become a high-tier expert pilot in a matter of years. It is because the Larkinsons supplied me with a living expert mech and let me ingest all of those general cultivation elixirs. Chapter 7234. The Trial of Worthiness. Chapter 7234. The Trial of Worthiness. The stars winked in the background. For as long as humans existed as a race, they often yearned to ascend to the stars. During more primitive times, they believed that the stars were gods or the residents of gods. They ascribed all sorts of myths to them, believing that their deities existed on a completely different plane of existence from themselves. Such beliefs may have faded nowadays, but people's yearning to become greater than themselves has never disappeared. Mech pilots possessed an especially powerful desire to attain power and greatness because there were ready-made examples of those who succeeded. From the ancient and fiery First Flame to the impossibly perfect chosen human, there were around 100 known god pilots who had successfully passed every test and survived every threat to their life before ascending to the ultimate height. Knowing that each mech pilot possessed the seed of godhood made people like Rosa Orphan feel special. It also placed a heap of expectations on their shoulders. Every mech pilot was expected to put serious effort into attaining their godhood. Those who fell out of the race early and accepted cushy positions on peaceful planets earned their fair share of contempt. When all they had to do was to make their mechs look intimidating and respond to occasional policing action, such mech pilots had firmly chosen to cling to their mortal lives rather than chase after transcendence. Mech pilots who chose to accept more serious jobs and assignments earned a lot more respect. The dangers they braved as they fought on behalf of their people tempered them and tested whether they were worthy to take a step closer to becoming a god. Venerable Orphan had taken the first step, yet now that she was trying to take the second step, her doubts continued to nip at her heels. Saint Dice seemed to grow in stature as she continued to stand tall over Venerable Orphan. The two had once been close comrades in arms. They still maintained their correspondence throughout their service to the Larkinson clan. But it was undeniable that once Dice had taken a crucial step forward, she had already become a woman who stood apart from the rest. Only a very small gathering of ace pilots earned the right to become her peers. Rosa hated that. She hated that she was not a part of that exclusive gathering. She hated that she was being left behind as if she was a failing academy student who needed to repeat another year. In fact, as far as she was concerned, she had already been held back by a year. Perhaps that was not a big deal in the greater scheme of things, but what if the situation persisted? What if she made noticeable progress in the next year, and the year after that? How much longer could she tolerate this humiliation before she was willing to admit that she was not worthy to advance any further? Look at you, Rosa. You are an ace pilot candidate. Your resonance strength had long reached the level where breaking through is possible. Becoming an ace pilot has become a matter of will and serendipity for the most part. You cannot control the latter, but the former is entirely based on you. Right now, you are failing. You are failing badly. Rosa scowled. Do you think I do not know that? I am doing my best to remain confident in myself, but these doubts of mine never go away. It is in my nature. I always question myself whether I am good enough. Each time I try to come to this conclusion, a comparison with a more successful pilot always leads me to an awful conclusion. Have you ever thought about not comparing yourself to me or anyone else? Dice asked as she crossed her arms and tapped her foot on an invisible surface. You are the only person who is doubting your ability. The rest of us are much more optimistic about your chances. VS himself has already prepared your new assignment once you have broken through and taken control over the Riot Mark III. Is that not a mark of confidence from your greatest patron? Why not believe in his judgment instead of your own? You do not know yourself as you think. The expert pilot under trial understood her friend's arguments, but she simply could not bring herself to agree with those words. Dice, I told you already, this is who I am. A day never goes by without comparing myself to another. Back when I was a kid, I compared myself to my classmates back in the Bright Republic where I grew up. When I became a teenager, I eagerly competed against my fellow cadets. proving myself to be above average but still far from reaching the top. As a mech officer of the Mech Corps, I did not know what I did right or wrong for me to get assigned to the Flagrant Vandals. Out of the mech pilots of the Flagrant Vandals, you are by far the most successful one to come out of your original mech regiment. Dice argued. That is not a real accomplishment and you know it. I do not really consider myself a Vandal anymore. Maybe I was afraid I would remain associated with the rest of them who have never shown any greater potential. That just validates my point. You are special, Rosa. Other Vandals have failed to become as powerful as you. This is a cause for celebration, not a reason to feel ashamed. Yet that was exactly what Rosa Orphan did. Shame always accompanied her doubts. She still felt inferior for one reason or another. Questions about her fitness and worthiness continued to gnaw at her being. Her thoughts spiraled in such a dark place that her current form began to morph. Look at the price for doubting yourself. Dice gestured with her arm. Look at your body and see how you are proving yourself as the weaker of two enemies. Rosa lowered her gaze and saw that her lower left leg began to get engulfed in a strange dark mist. Started small but slowly began to creep up. Rosa felt as if she was starting to lose any feeling and control over the parts of herself that became corrupted. A vague sense of alarm welled up in the core of her being. She instinctively figured out that this sight was not a meaningless illusion. The jolt was sharp enough to inject a measure of lucidity in her consciousness. She was undergoing a trial. She had no idea what was happening in reality, but for the time being her consciousness was stuck in this mysterious space. Her current manifestation likely represented her soul, willpower, or a mix between the two. Whatever the case, its condition directly reflected her health and condition. This meant that any maladies that affected her manifestation affected the rest of her as well. The dark mist was gaining ground. Anything it touched became gray and started to get affected by strange phenomena that made the affected parts of her body less consistent. She was slowly transforming into a freak 1 millimeter at a time. While she felt alarmed at this development, what could she do to halt its advance? The answers were not that difficult to find. She needed to muster up more confidence. The more she believed in herself, the more she would be able to resist this outside invasion. Yet while other peak expert pilots found it simple to believe in themselves, Rosa Orphan continued to face the same mental blocks as before. Her doubts had become as permanent and solidified as her bottlenecks. They may have even merged with each other. Without getting rid of her bottlenecks, how could she gather enough confidence to earn her sainthood? You disappoint me, Rosa. I had long assumed that you would serve as a strong and reliable spear for the Larkinson clan. As uncouth as you may be, you and your riot have remained steadfast guardians of our people. Many of them have reason to thank you for your service, but this may not remain the case forever. Rosa Orphan frowned as he saw that Dice had quietly disappeared. Janzi had taken the ace pilot's place. You have no right to judge me, Janzi. You are still an expert pilot like myself. I am younger than you. I believe that entitles me to lecture you. Your doubts are continuing to lead you astray. While you waste your time on questioning your own worth, younger expert pilots such as myself and others are making progress in their own ways. Already, the next generation of Larkinson champions are growing rapidly. They can participate in all the fights they want while they are serving with the expeditionary fleet. It has also become easier for them to redeem helpful elixirs from the war exchange. As pricey as they may be, their effects are worth it as it can allow the brats who have not yet even reached their 30s to catch up with our resonance strength. Rosa felt shocked for a moment. What did you say? Are there people in their 20s among our latest cohort of expert pilots? You better believe it, Rosa. Janzi still maintained her stern and judgmental expression. It will take a few more years and a custom high-tier expert mech designed by VS and Gloriana for them to catch up to St. Dice, but it will happen sooner or later. Their qualifications are much greater than yours and their valor on the battlefield is not any less. The information that a bunch of brats that were young enough to be her children started to catch up to her rank with the possibility of surpassing it impacted her badly. Her mental balance became so disturbed that the dark mist had managed to creep up all the way to her waist. The corruption started to spread towards her torso and other legs. She felt she was losing more and more parts of herself. As Rosa twisted her manifested body, she found to her surprise that the darkened parts did not obey her commands, but did not remain entirely still either. The darkened foot began to lift and descend as if stepping on a pedal. The knee experimentally shifted the lower leg back and forth, forcing her other leg to compensate lest she lose her balance. Horror slowly welled up inside Rosa Orphan as she realized that the corrupted portion of her manifested body had fallen under the control of a different existence. Rosa was unable to gain much of an impression of this other entity. The corruption spreading throughout his body did not trip her intuition or made her feel a threat to her life. Perhaps that was the scariest part about this process. The corruption was silent and subtle. As long as Rosa Orphan lowered her guard for any reason, its spread accelerated. It did not take an intellectual powerhouse for her to conclude that she could never let the corruption spread to her head and convert her entirely. I must prove myself worthy. She had no idea how she could push back against this wave of corruption. But the best way she could think up was to follow her original plan and trigger her second apotheosis. All of her doubts would be seared away by her explosion in strength. No demonic corruption could taint her inviolable soul, as her saint kingdom completely took charge of her personal protection. Prove yourself worthy? Janzi asked in a slightly incredulous tone. You are doing the opposite of that, Rosa. I am growing more and more disappointed in you, my old friend. My own breakthrough is not far from coming. I have made my own gains while piloting the Bastion on the battlefield. So what if the dated tech and construction of our machines is holding us back? Confidence is all you need to overcome these handicaps. The fact that you are still not able to make the push despite being handed over the most powerful junior ace mech is disappointing. Rosa continued to lower her head in shame. Chapter 7235. Concerning Signs. Chapter 7235. Concerning Signs. The control room remained mostly silent. The only significant noise that people inside could hear was the low hum of machinery. In fact, the instruments of the Tarask were so advanced that it was trivially easy to keep them silent. However, such behavior often unnerved humans. It also made it harder to know whether they were active or dormant. For psychological and utility reasons, most larger devices and machines of significance tended to generate at least a modest amount of noise if only to signal their active states. The hum of machinery remained the only noise heard by VS and the other occupants. This was not supposed to be the case. The workstations should at least release beeps or alert noises. But they remained silent as they had been unable to detect any obvious abnormalities. Gloriana frowned more and more until she finally had enough. Are the readings false? Is the Prophet's Bane feeding us false data? She had good reasons to voice her suspicions. For one, the Riot Mark III remained completely still during its activation. Its systems came online in order and passed all of the diagnostics without any major concerns. This attracted Gloriana's suspicion as the data looked way too normal given that the Riot Mark III had turned into a D-Mech. Even if its demonic mutations were much less obvious than before, they were still present. The physical form of the Riot Mark III constantly fluctuated as if slightly alternate versions of the same machine rapidly switched places with the original machine for a few milliseconds before making room for other versions. The bizarre changes were not illusionary. The slightly altered forms of the Riot Mark III were completely real and physical as far as VS and Gloriana could ascertain from the outside. Since the Riot Mark III was in flux from a physical perspective, the data reading should have reflected its physical inconsistencies. This did not happen for the most part. A lot of the telemetry of the mech looked suspiciously normal. It was as if the machine was truly standing in place. Even the data supplied by the Carmine system attracted suspicion. What is the Carmine system doing? On a physical level, it is operating normally, VS said in a half-believing voice. Venerable Orphan has shown no sign of rejecting the artificial blood being pumped through her veins. The Carmine system has not been corrupted to a noticeable degree. All of its core and auxiliary functions are working as intended. Regardless of my suspicions, I see no reason to believe the Carmine system has failed on a biological level. What I am more concerned about is how the spiritual side is faring. From what I can tell, Venerable Rosa Orphan has already formed a stable blood pact with the Riot Mark III. They formed the connection remarkably quickly. I am surprised that there is hardly any delay. That sounds even more suspicious, Gloriana said. If your words are correct, does this mean that the Prophet's Bane actively embraced the blood pact? VS inclined his head. I believe so. It did not resist the new pilot, but tried to be as accommodating as possible. The Prophet's Bane may not be as mindless and irrational as we thought. It is much scarier for it to show foresight and effectively rein in its short-term impulses. I fear that it has already sprung a trap as soon as it formed the widest possible channel with the pilot. The middle demon stands to take over Venerable Orphan's body with much greater speed and effectiveness, if it makes use of both the neural interface and the Carmine system at the same time. What is the pilot's condition? That is more difficult to ascertain, VS said with a frown as he continued to study the data related to Venerable Orphan's physiology. Her body remains healthy and unaffected. Her brain is much more active, so she is definitely doing a lot of thinking, but none of that is reflecting back onto the mech itself. The Riot Mark III has not received a single command from its pilot. That meant that the two were locked in a dialogue or conflict that took place on a level that VS and the instruments could never breach at their current tech level. That left VS with no other recourse than to monitor the Riot Mark III using Blinky's precise senses. The problem was that the Riot's own chaotic nature worked against him. The D-Mecha's enhancements specifically guarded against any form of examination, whether conventional or spiritual. Blinky would at least have to get much closer and maybe even dive inside the machine in order to ascertain its condition. This was not a good idea because Rosa Orphan's willpower would definitely repel any intruder as violently as possible. Despite the absence of clues, VS could nonetheless surmise that she was not in a good position right now. This was her test which she willingly subjected herself to. It was not appropriate for him to disturb her and break her concentration during a critical moment of her life. What is your guess? You must have formed your own ideas about the current state of your DMEC. Gloriana pointedly asked. She was right. VS did not always need hard proof in order to form his own conclusions. Their reliability may be in question, but he was right more often than not. His expertise was so diverse and scattered that he was able to make crazy inferences that hardly any other mech designer could equal. VS took a moment to compose his words. Though he had a definite guess in mind, he needed to frame his response carefully to avoid misinterpretations. I think that Venerable Orphan is in deep trouble. Like really deep, he said. When we presented the completed DMEC to her, we already knew that it is inhabited by a much more powerful and unquestionably hostile artifact spirit. The best way for her to overcome this challenge is to trigger her second apotheosis right away. I was hoping that she would become so exuberant about piloting a new machine that she could become an ace pilot before the demon could pounce. But it appears that this scenario has not come to pass. So Venerable Orphan lacks the strength to dominate the demon. VS nodded. It appears so. I think that she should normally be able to put up a good fight, but even under the best of circumstances, it is unlikely for her to be able to fend off an aggressive middle demon that has not only been strengthened multiple times, but also devoured the old living mech and became the sole spiritual master of the Riot Mark III. This is Rosa Orphan's true test. If she wants to prevent the demon from devouring her and claiming her body for itself, then she needs to step up and fight back harder than she has ever done before. And you think she is not doing that at the moment? We would have detected more positive signs if that was the case. An absence of unusual signals implies that the Prophet's Bane has gained the upper hand. Can we not do anything for Venerable Orphan, then? Can you summon one of your design spirits to help her out? Or forcibly shut down our mech? While there are no signs that Venerable Orphan is aware or in control of the machine, she is still interfaced with the Riot Mark III. She is passively resonating with the mech. While that does not mean a proper resonance shield has formed, the expert mech will automatically repulse all unnatural intrusions. The only way to get past this universal repulsion effect is to bring someone she trusts well enough to make an exception. His wife immediately understood that they did not have such a thing at hand. A pity. Siblings and direct family relationships have proven to be the only relationship types that are strong enough to make high-ranking mech pilots lower their guard against each other. Rosa Orphan is not a Gemini, and she does not have a sibling relationship as close as the one between Casella Ingvar and Iman Ingvar. The Gemini family and the Ingvar siblings had proved that high-ranking mech pilots did not always have to exclude everyone aside from themselves. It was fascinating to witness champions who normally became strong due to possessing endless confidence in themselves readily form a reliance on the individuals they cared about the most. Iman was so obsessed with her sister that he freely allowed her willpower to affect him. This was an exceptionally rare phenomena that VS had never really seen outside of the aforementioned cases. In short, VS knew that there was no easy way for him to intervene. He knew that when he completed the Riot Mark III and disclosed the risk factors to the expert pilot. She is on her own, he concluded. While we have installed a temporary kill switch into the mech, do you really think the Prophet's Bane will let us forcibly turn off the power reactor? We will have to physically penetrate the Riot Mark III's chaos armor and disable the power reactor in order to interrupt whatever is going on. Even then, we may end up causing permanent harm to Venerable Orphan due to interrupting a process that should not have been stopped so suddenly. Gloriana's expression grew severe. A substantial amount of time has already passed without any indication that she has gained control over her dangerous machine. I am increasingly more certain that she will perish or completely lose her qualifications to fight if this pattern persists. Is it not better to preserve what little we can salvage from her than to let her die? He shook his head. The outcome is not yet set in stone. I believe in her. High-ranking mech pilots are famed for snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. The probability of a breakthrough rises when her sense of crisis grows higher. This is why she has insisted to me that we must not intervene. She does not want the lingering expectation that we will come and bail her out to weaken her resolve and give her the impression that she can rely on others for rescue. For better or worse, we should do as she has asked. Do not forget that she has acknowledged the risks and does not hold others responsible for a possible failure. He still hoped that she would pull through somehow, but the odds of that happening started to diminish. Over time, VS was able to sense subtle changes to the machine. Rosa Orphan's willpower began to weaken over time. The deterioration happened slowly at first, but began to accelerate in pace. Even Gloriana and Alexa managed to detect this very concerning change as the resonance meters measured the reduction in true resonance with a reasonable degree of accuracy. The resonance meters are all returning consistent results. Alexis Strion said. The Riot Mark III's true resonance has dropped below 50 levares. According to historical statistical studies, the probability of a breakthrough at 50 levares is at least 2 orders of magnitude lower than the probability of the same happening at 60 levares. If the decline in true resonance continues at its current pace, it will take less than a minute for Venerable Orphan to drop below the minimum resonance strength that is known to trigger a successful second apotheosis. VS frowned. What was happening to Venerable Orphan that caused her will to fight to weaken to such a dramatic degree? She can still make it through, he said with faltering hope. Expert pilots can be highly inconsistent. They can be incredibly depressed in one moment and incredibly motivated the next moment. Let us remain patient and wish her luck. His wife was not as optimistic as him. She was already thinking about who was responsible for organizing Rosa Orphan's funeral arrangements. More importantly, she also thought about how she could escape culpability for developing a mech that directly led to the death of its own pilot. It should be easy to shove most of the blame to her husband since he was the source of all of this craziness, but she still held a bit of responsibility for enabling his antics and not doing enough to discourage his wild ideas. She was not about to let her husband ruin her career. Chapter 7236. The Disappointment of the Larkinson Clan. Chapter 7236. The Disappointment of the Larkinson Clan. Venerable Rosa Orphan stood silent as she rewatched all of the battles of her career. From the time she served in the Mech Corps of the Bright Republic to the period where she fought against the native aliens in the Red War, each of her strengths and weaknesses laid bare before her eyes. Making difficult decisions during the heat of the moment in the middle of a busy battlefield was very different from watching your own performance from old footage. Rosa hated it. She hated the sight of how she piloted the Riot and the previous mechs she used over the course of her career. It was impossible for her to ignore all of the flaws and shortcomings of her actions. As a high-tier expert pilot with plenty of experience under her belt, she knew what good piloting looked like. She only had to watch St. Dice fight with the first Sword Mark III to understand what she could become if she applied her skills better. Unfortunately, Rosa was way too far from reaching her friend and former peer's abilities. The gap was so great that Rosa grew more and more ashamed as she witnessed her horrendous performance. No matter what stage of her career she was in, there was always plenty to criticize. She shouldn't have engaged that opponent. She should have paid more attention to the plight of her comrades. She should have performed a different attack during a specific sequence. There were many situations where she could have defeated more opponents and won the battle if she just made the right decisions. To see how many opportunities she missed and how she was so fixated on what was right in front of her that she missed more important developments elsewhere damaged her self-esteem even further. She had no way of denying these mistakes. Her judgment as a professional mech pilot could not be fooled to this degree. Much of her actions and decisions were objectively bad, especially now that she was able to compare them to each other. A profound sense of shame spread throughout her being. To see her flail about without knowing any better was just too humiliating. She remembered most of the battles well enough to know that they were not fake in any way. Rosa may have been younger and much less skilled at the time, but even then she had enough piloting and command ability back then to make much better choices. Venerable Orphan did not necessarily feel ashamed for making all of those mistakes per se. She was disappointed in herself, but her faults were not irredeemable. The problem was that she kept making them. She recognized that she had a number of bad assets that she had never seriously addressed. The fact that half of them were problems in the first place did not even register in her mind. So what if she favored aggression over caution? So what if she was a little too willing to take risks and let her machine take the brunt of the damage? So what if she did not bother to listen to the requests and proposals of the mech pilots around her machine? Back when she still felt as if she was on top of the universe, these flaws seemed trivial to her at the time. It was only now that she was forced to look at her reflection in the mirror that she could no longer deny what was obvious to any serious mech pilot. Venerable Rosa Orphan was a neglectful fighter. She recognized that she had a bad case of tunnel vision, but never thought it was wrong because she was so consumed by her own apparent strength. This was why she hated to review her own performance. She could not help but recognize her own faults and acknowledge the truth of her own flaws. This is the real Rosa Orphan. St. Dice spoke as she continued to pass judgment over her friend. I have advised you time and time again that reviewing your own actions after a deployment is a valuable learning opportunity. You cannot improve if you do not diagnose your shortcomings. Your refusal to look at your mistakes has left you in an ignorant state where you keep repeating them over and over. She made a good point. Rosa hated it that her friend pointed out the truth. To see herself fumble around right from the start of her career and continue to make similar mistakes like a blind pig made her feel embarrassed beyond reason. She no longer felt she was worthy to be an expert pilot, let alone becoming an ace pilot. No ace pilot would fight in such a shameful manner. The difference between us is that your confidence is based on your ego, while mine is based on the skills and techniques that I have diligently trained almost every day. Saint Dice continued to rub in her superiority. You have wasted much of your time on unproductive activities. To your credit, you are not lazy, but your training is largely ineffective due to your refusal to diagnose your own problems and formulate deliberate plans to address them. She felt like such a failure. She could not bring herself to deny Dice's painfully accurate criticism. How could Rosa ever think she deserved to become a saint? Ace pilots were supposed to be the best of all expert pilots. Her performance made it clear that she did not rank close to the top 1%, let alone top 0.1%. There were easily hundreds if not thousands more high-tier expert pilots in the entire new frontier who possessed superior qualifications than herself. Unlike a blind and ignorant pig like herself, these diligent and disciplined expert pilots maintained a strict and targeted training regime that was much closer to the one practiced by Dice back when she was an expert pilot as well. These champions did not rest on their laurels like Rosa Orphan, but recognized the vast gulf between their current ranks and the next one. They were not afraid to review their old battle footage and frankly admit their own shortcomings. Only by honestly confronting and recognizing their own faults were they able to mitigate them in the most effective manner. As Rosa Orphan recognized how unworthy she was, she practically lost control of both of her legs. The black corruption had completely taken over her lower body and was starting to capture her arms as well. This left her immobile and feeling as if she was increasingly losing essential parts of herself. It became a little more difficult to maintain her awareness. She faintly detected that her willpower was waning, but she had no idea how to stall this deterioration. Her willpower was based on confidence. How could she possibly feel confident in her abilities when she recognized that she was the expert pilot equivalent of a clown all this time? Sure, her performance on the battlefield was not bad by any means, but she had been wasting so much of her potential due to the fact that she had never trained as diligently as others. Even venerable Vincent Ricklin took his boxing training more seriously than her own spearmanship drills. You have let down the expectations of the Larkinson clan, a new and younger female voice uttered. The clan has graciously provided you with some of the best mechs that we could develop for you. We spent valuable resources to support you as our champion, yet by squandering much of your growth opportunities, you have turned into a sad excuse of a high-tier expert pilot. All of those general cultivation elixirs that we stuffed down your throat could have been used to prep a more deserving champion for greatness. If your current state is the extent of your martial prowess during these trying times, then you have let down our clan. Rosa Orphan wanted to issue a retort, but she could not think of any decent argument to defend herself. She had transgressed. She had wasted too much resources. She did not feel worthy to pilot a mech as fine as the Riot Mark III. Venerable Janzi Larkinson sneered as she directed her judgmental glare straight at the sad sack that thought she deserved to become an ace pilot. You do not deserve any of our sympathy and pity. Aside from being overly generous, our clan has not erred in our treatment of you. We only misjudged your worth and thought you would be a worthy candidate for the second full superdimensional mech of our clan. Do you understand how much the former patriarch and his wife have invested in your high-tech machine? There is more superclass materials and exotic tech stuffed into the Archimech frame than you can imagine. I wouldn't expect an illiterate brute like you to understand the specifics, but even you should understand how rare it is to make a mech out of armor-grade superdimensional matter. The latest super material to take red humanity by storm deserved all of the hype. Armor-grade superdimensional matter was rare beyond belief, yet the Larkinson clan was still willing to invest heaps of it into her Riot Mark III. The Larkinsons shouldn't have done so. Rosa Orphan did not deserve to pilot such an absurdly strong mech. Other mech pilots such as Saint Tusa and Venerable Janzi deserved to make use of a high-grade superdimensional mech much more. What do you even bring to the table, Rosa? Janzi asked with her constant sneer. Are you a killer of phase whales like Dice? Are you an indomitable shield and protector like Janzi? Or are you a hyper-fast scout and skirmisher like Tusa? I am none of them, Rosa admitted. Exactly. You are nothing. You used to pilot a spearman mech that is weaker in offense than the First Sword, less durable than the Bastion and much slower than the Dark Zephyr. Perhaps the Riot Mark III is able to overturn most of this, but you do not deserve all of these gains. You are able to make much less use of them than the mech pilots that I have mentioned. Dice can turn every weapon into an instrument of slaughter. Janzi can make a mech last twice as long as yours. Tusa can evade many more attacks than you. What about you? What is your advantage? Janzi snorted. Thought so. This is the gap between you and the rest of us. You not only neglected your training, but did not think to develop an advantage that is not yet covered by others. You are a master of none. You possess no unique killer moves and have no famous deeds to your name. You are the most dispensable high-ranking expert pilot of our clan. At least Casella is mourning Iman's loss. No one will seriously mourn for you when you inevitably perish. Rosa felt her heart being pierced by the words of her friends. The truth in them rang so loud that they deafened her ears. How could she be so blind to her failings? She did not deserve to become an ace pilot. A saint was the best of all of the expert pilots. Rosa Orphan was way too far from matching this ideal. As the expert pilot continued to mentally beat herself up, the dark fog continued to overtake more and more of her body. Her lower torso began to get corrupted while her arms became completely engulfed. Much of her form began to lose definition as a different presence began to surge inside her manifestation. She was changing by the second. This should have alarmed her, but for whatever reason Rosa accepted it as if it was her penance. Chapter 7237. The Unmaking. Chapter 7237. The Unmaking. A small part of Venerable Rosa Orphan recognized that she was dying. Darkness and disorder had taken over much of her body. Her limbs had fallen entirely to the strange miasma that defied her understanding. Her torso had largely fallen to its way, with only her heart and part of her lungs still remaining in pristine condition. Her head also remained her own. As the center of her mind and will, she was better able to resist the advance of darkness. Helping to resist the encroaching darkness was her companion spirit. Yet this addition only delayed the encroaching tide. How long could she fend off the invasion? She had already lost a lot of strength. Her willpower continued to deflate while her resolve weakened with every passing second. Her fighting spirit grew dull while the fire in her heart threatened to snuff out entirely. She was not doing a good job of serving as a model for all mech pilots at the moment. An expert pilot was not just a warrior. He or she was meant to serve as a symbol and a source of inspiration. Each of them exemplified the possibility that every mech pilot possessed a seed of greatness in themselves. For an expert pilot like herself to falter and become consumed by her own doubts was an intolerable flaw. Though Rosa Orphan still possessed enough of a willingness to live that she was able to stem the foreign invasion that had taken over much of her manifestation, her resistance continued to weaken. Perhaps the only reason why her will and personality had not fractured entirely at this time was because the invader had slowed its pace in order to digest the parts of herself more thoroughly. Memories started to fade. It became increasingly harder to maintain what scrap of awareness that was left. She knew that she was being unmade, starting from her most vulnerable portions of herself. She should be fighting back against this encroachment. She should have defied the attempt to take over everything that made her Rosa Orphan and repel the invader. A true expert pilot would push back no matter the price and fight for any chance of survival, no matter how fleeting. Rosa Orphan understood all of that, yet could not gather the motivation to resist. It was as if this part of herself had gotten devoured first. She was unraveling with every passing second. Her humanity had turned into a buffet which the foreign invader devoured at a slow but inexorable pace. Yes, continue to wallow in your weaknesses and your failings. You disgust me. As soon as I have completed my absorption of everything that belongs to you, I shall take your place and become the sole and undisputable master of the Riot Mark III. Not even the mech designers of this weapon of war shall deprive me from claiming this superdimensional mech. Rosa raised her head just enough to see that Saint Dice and Venerable Janzi had disappeared. They no longer voiced their criticism and disappointment at Venerable Orphan. They had stopped caring for the woman they once regarded as a close friend and comrade. They couldn't be bothered to waste their time on her. She was a lost cause to them as far as they were concerned. That only left one more individual to describe her failings. Herself. The mirror version of Rosa Orphan possessed a completely different demeanor. It or she looked like her but in a less definable way. Her body and expression were difficult to observe because they were subjected to a slightly familiar interference effect. That made it a lot harder to read their meanings and intentions. This shrouded version of herself did reveal enough of her face to understand that she was grinning in a gleeful manner. You are weak and unqualified to pilot the Riot Mark III. The alternative Rosa spoke with sadistic undertones. Your first at interfacing with the mech is a catastrophe. You completely lack the strength and mental fortitude to tame this machine. How pathetic. The Riot Mark II is made for you. Despite the irregularities that occurred, you should still have been able to take control over it. Instead, your negative progress condemns you. It is clear that you are not ace pilot material. The real Rosa Orphan slowly narrowed her eyes. She knew that she had to feel an intense emotion at this time, but she could not come up with the idea of what she had exactly lost. That only made the false Rosa Orphan more gleeful. You have done your duty, if only barely. Your career is over and so is your life. Let me take over in your stead. I am stronger, more confident, and will never make the mistakes that have dragged your heels. Let me be your successor. You no longer deserve to live anymore. Embrace your death so that your body and your willpower can be used for greater purposes. The foggy miasma continued to devour the real orphan's torso, even beginning to penetrate into the heart. However, since her manifestation was not a real physical body, the heart did not play an especially great role. What truly mattered was her head, or more specifically her brain. This was the true remaining bastion of her personality, her life and her existence. Rosa truly thought about handing it all over to this invader who had taken on a distorted version of her visage. What was the point of further resistance? She had recognized that she was unworthy to become an ace pilot. Her grand attempt to corner herself into breaking through was a plan made out of hubris from the very start. She lacked the strength and conviction to earn her way to sainthood. If her confidence crumbled so easily after a single round of self-reflection, then what was the point of resisting any further? At least this invader would be able to do a better job. Whether the conqueror of her own strength and body would be willing to pledge her loyalty to the Larkinson clan was not her problem anymore. She couldn't bring herself to care about the Larkinsons. Perhaps she never really cared about them in the first place. She had few friends among them. Her relationships with her closest peers had weakened due to distance and other reasons. She wouldn't be missed. She was certain of that. She was too worthless to make anyone shed a tear for her passing. The real Rosa Orphan opened her mouth for what may be the last time. I give up. You win. You can have it all. I hope that you can do more with what I have than a loser like myself. Tears leaked from her manifested eyes, yet Rosa Orphan did not understand why she was shedding them in the first place. Perhaps a fading part of herself recognized the gravity of her decision, but what little that she had left could not process such emotions anymore. She felt nothing. Her capacity to feel emotions had mostly unraveled while her thoughts grew increasingly more foggy. Soon, all of her thoughts and emotions would fade entirely. That would be the moment her existence passed on entirely. As the manifestation of Rosa Orphan continued to succumb to the invader, the false version of herself saw no need to speak any further. The intruder had already grasped the fruits of her victory. As the tide of corruption threatened to devour the last scraps of light that was left of the original Rosa Orphan, it suddenly ceased. This was not due to mercy on the invader's end. Rosa Orphan also did not manage to regain enough lucidity to put up a sudden resistance. Instead, the final wave of conquest and subversion crashed against a barrier that thrummed with the power of space. A third party had intervened. This should not be possible. As pathetic and weak as Rosa Orphan had become, a third party shouldn't have been able to barge in and intervene in this power struggle. What was happening? The third party did not keep both sides waiting for long. The new presence emerged from the most core parts of Rosa Orphan's remaining soul. A small manifestation of Kalanxo had arrived. The reptilian creature turned design spirit had detected Venerable Orphan's dire state, and forcefully intervened to save the woman that she had bonded with many years ago on the surface of a forgotten planet from the old galaxy. The small manifestation of Kalanxo did not just project a barrier to halt the invader's progress. The design spirit also turned to whatever was left of the real Rosa Orphan and encouraged her to fight back and survive. The false Rosa Orphan sneered at the last-second intervention of a design spirit. Begone, creature. You are not welcome here. This wretch is not worth your attention. She is a weak and pathetic failure of an expert pilot. I will do better than her. I won't even need your protection anymore. As soon as I find the anchor of your connection to her, I shall relish the act of severing it. The mere fact that it still exists is another mark of failure. Expert pilots must rely on themselves to surpass their limitations. They can lean on design spirits such as you in order to save them from their own failings. Begone. Kalanxo's alien eyes glared at the false Rosa Orphan with animosity. What are you looking at, you beast? The apparent invader taunted the design spirit. Do not think you can bluff me into surrendering. Your connection with Rosa is limited. You can only channel so much of your strength. Even now, your barrier is weakening by the second. I will have my prize sooner or later. Even if you combine your feeble power with this failure of an expert pilot, it is far too late for you to launch a counterattack. My conquest is inevitable. The design spirit could not refute the truth of this hostile entity's words. She was indeed unable to bring more than a tiny fraction of her full might to bear. Just establishing this connection under the current circumstances was already arduous enough. Yet Kalanxo never thought to rely on brute force. She disregarded the false woman and addressed the real Rosa Orphan. The design spirit never communicated by verbalizing human words. She preferred to communicate in a more direct fashion by passing on entire ideas and impressions. Though it was difficult for the real Rosa to interpret Kalanxo's message, the method of information transmission made it a lot easier for her to understand the design spirit's revelations. According to Kalanxo, Rosa Orphan was not weak. She was strong. I am not weak. So what if she was not as skilled as Saint Dice? Every pilot had their own strengths. Mediocre skill was not the end of the universe for them. Ace pilots had other ways to excel in combat. Strong enthusiasm and guts could often compensate for careful planning and execution. I am not worthless. Venerable Rosa Orphan mattered to the Larkinsons. She had fought to defend the clan when it was still weak and vulnerable. Her contributions to the early battles played a decisive role in letting it grow to a much greater height. Even now, her importance was still significant, as she could still protect a lot of clansmen as an expert pilot and carried the possibility of becoming an even greater guardian. You are not the intruder. Kalangso divulged the truth. The multi-century-old beast may not be as strong or full of knowledge like some of the other design spirits, but she had her own strengths. The facade created by the false Rosa orphan did not fool the beast for a second. Now that the design spirit pointed it out, the real Rosa orphan, or what was left of her, suddenly felt as if a fog had lifted from her eyes. She suddenly realized the actual truth. Venerable orphan thought that the hostile ghost who appeared and took on the guise of Dice, Janzi, and a different version of herself was the demon that she set out to conquer. Yet that was not the case at all. The truth was so much different from what she imagined. The demon did not invade her soul directly. Instead, according to Kalangso, the prophet's bane had somehow tampered with a small part of her soul before sitting back and waiting for it to develop into a new and corrupted version of herself. In other words, Rosa orphan had actually been arguing with herself all this time. A spark of anger ignited in the parts of her soul that remained untouched. This spark rapidly turned into a blaze as Rosa suddenly managed to regain the ability to experience intense fury. You bastard! Chapter 7238. The Real Demon. Chapter 7238. The Real Demon. VS continued to stare at the Riot Mark III with no clue what was going on inside. This was one of the few rare moments where he regretted that he had done too good of a job. No matter whether it was the Chaos Armor, the gem he had integrated into the original version of the Riot a long time ago, or the special capabilities of the Prophet's Bane, the DMEC still managed to resist his probes. VS did not trust the telemetry transmitted by the machine. The scanners of the workshop could not overcome the chaotic interference produced by the Chaos Armor. Blinky's excellent spiritual senses still could not take a peek of what was taking place inside either. It was as if he had accidentally turned the Riot Mark III into a demonic goo container. From the moment Venerable Orphan entered the cockpit and interfaced with the DMEC for the first time, a deathmatch commenced where out of the two occupants, only one was destined to triumph. VS felt a lot more concerned about the outcome of this particular competition. It was easy for him to throw a bunch of souls and demons into a goo container and let them sort out the winner by themselves. The demise of any one of them did not matter to him, as he did not have a strong attachment to any particular life. Not even the Prophet's Bane was indispensable to him. If another demon managed to defeat the remnant taken from the Doom of Remus Gem, then the victor should at least have been able to assimilate a part of what made the loser special. This scenario never happened. The Prophet's Bane had entered every brutal free-for-all with an advantage and came out of the demon mixers as the sole survivor several times in a row. There was no way that such a demonic entity was weak. Not even the willpower suppression of an expert pilot could hold it back for long. The only way out for Venerable Rosa Orphan was to advance to the rank of ace pilot. This was why VS found it increasingly harder to cling to hope. He needed to be realistic. The more time passed without any visible breakthrough manifestations, the greater the probability that Venerable Orphan succumbed to her DMEC. VS. Patience, he said. We have not detected any positive or negative reactions so far. I can only assume that the two are still in conflict. I do not want to disturb it in any way. Let it play out. Who knows if Rosa Orphan is able to make a surprise comeback. I promised to her that I would not ruin her moment. She sounded very insistent that she did not want us to intervene and forcibly pull her out of the cockpit. It has been more than half an hour, VS. Gloriana reminded her husband. This is an excessive amount of time as far as first activations are concerned. I will wait for another 30 minutes. If Venerable Orphan has not shown any sign that she has gained control over the Riot Mark III, then I will call in the meshers and have them intervene. We are operating in their warship, after all. Perhaps they can be of assistance. VS frowned, but he did not reject her suggestion out of hand. Perhaps it may be better to call in outside help if it became more and more obvious that the situation has gone out of control. As he wondered what the hell was going on inside the Riot Mark III, he remained unaware that Venerable Rosa Orphan had suddenly managed to halt her seemingly inexorable decline. In fact, she did more than stop her descent. As realization settled in, Rosa grew furious at how she had almost gotten hoodwinked into killing herself. Although she still did not know what exactly was going on with this weird space, she instinctively understood that this was part of a test of sorts. A test that she had been losing badly before Kalangso emerged and woke her up to the truth. It is too late. The false Rosa grinned as she taunted the victim. I was born from your feelings of inferiority. You birthed me to become the superior version of yourself. Look at your current state. So what if you got a reminder? Almost all of your soul has surrendered to me. I have claimed so much of you that there is very little that you have left to take back what you have lost. I only need to complete my final push in order to claim everything. The real Rosa orphan gritted her teeth. You are wrong. I am not gone yet. Besides, you are a bad liar. You are not the better version of me. You are the spawn of the demon. My willpower is still my own. You have done nothing to earn it. As long as there is still a small part of me left, you can forget about taking over my will. Her false mirror laughed in response. Ha ha ha. Do you really think you have a chance now that you have regained your bravado? It does not work that way. Willpower alone is not a weapon. It only truly becomes powerful when you can combine it with your soul. Now that I have taken over much of it, there is too little ground for you to make a comeback. Oh really? With the help of her willpower, the real venerable orphan started to regain the ground she lost. This became visible as the corruption that had engulfed her entire soul manifestation started to recede starting from the neck area. The resistance was much harder than she expected. The false version of herself might not be able to leverage any willpower, but she controlled so much of the soul that it was difficult for the real version of herself to make good progress. An added challenge to this competition was that she could not afford to be too careless and destroy any part of her soul. Rosa needed to work delicately enough to purify the corruption, which was much harder than it sounded. Yet as long as she was able to make any progress, she had hope of regaining what originally belonged to herself. Her confidence grew. Each part of her soul that came back to her allowed her to leverage her willpower more effectively. This would not only speed up her progress, but prevent her false self from making a comeback. Get out of my head, she roared as she gradually recaptured her upper torso and her shoulders. This sped up the real venerable orphan's reclamation speed by multiple times. Her confidence soared as her advantage continued to snowball. However, despite being on the losing end this time, the illusion that represented the false version of herself still did not drop her smirk. You could have given up painlessly, you know. Going out on a whimper is the fate that a loser and a failure like you deserved. Since you chose to put up a fight to the end, I have no choice but to make this a lot more painful for the both of us. Do you know that even though you have formed a blood pact, the demon has largely maintained his distance? Ha! The false Rosa orphan smirked wider. I tried to do this the quiet way. I managed to take over most of your soul without making you feel as if you were under attack. That is because I am still a version of yourself. The reason why the demon kept its distance was to avoid alerting you in advance. Your willpower initially overlooked my presence, but the same wouldn't happen if the demon arrived in advance. Not only would your resistance at the start be a lot stronger, but the ensuing struggle would also cause large parts of your soul to tear into pieces. The real Rosa orphan suddenly widened her eyes. She might not be the smartest expert pilot around, but she was not stupid. She readily figured out what this evil version of herself was trying to say. Before she knew it, the false Rosa orphan completely opened herself up to the prophet's bane. The foul demon eagerly took advantage of the opening and slipped right in through the blood pact. This caused the illusion of the false Rosa orphan to mutate and acquire a handful of random demonic traits. The real fight has begun. The illusion had disappeared. The sudden intrusion of the demon had a devastating effect on Rosa orphan's soul. Not only did the prophet's bane take over and devour the false version of herself, but it also leveraged its considerable strength into taking over the rest of the soul. Ah! The real Rosa orphan faced much more resistance than before. She had yet to regain enough lost ground to gain the upper hand in this confrontation. In fact, even if she was still in control over her soul, the expert pilot doubted that she would be able to hold back the demon for long. The prophet's bane was too powerful. While his energy encountered a lot of difficulties in overcoming her extraordinary willpower, the demon had much greater reserves than she could imagine. At this moment, venerable orphan could feel the demon pushing her back to the point where she was losing control over her shoulders and upper torso. This further put the demon at an advantage. As the prophet's bane rapidly assimilated the corrupted portions of her soul, it rapidly established its foundation within the Riot Mark III and its future human meat puppet. Now that the prophet's bane had directly occupied large parts of her soul, venerable orphan was able to understand the demon a lot better. It is too much. There were hardly any barriers between the two. Due to the false Rosa orphan's complete surrender, the prophet's bane had been very successful in assimilating much but not everything that belonged to the former. The demon knew everything about her memories, thoughts, emotions, and so on. This knowledge allowed the malevolent being to quickly fortify its occupation of Rosa orphan's soul and strengthen its offensive. At the same time, Rosa orphan also gained a large understanding of the demon. Much of it was incomprehensible to her, but she quickly figured out how bad it would be if the middle demon completely took her soul. Nothing of her would be left. Even her body would turn into a vessel to propagate the demon's hatred and overwhelming desire to spread chaos. Ah! As Rosa orphan desperately tried to leverage her willpower to slow down the enemy advance, she began to experience greater pain than before. Unlike the false version of herself, the Prophet's Bane did not care about minimizing damage and was all too willing to inflict damage in lieu of surrender. What was even worse was that Rosa could faintly feel that her body was in pain. She had no idea what was going on, but her intuition told her that the Riot Mark III was seriously harming her body somehow. This two-pronged assault against her soul and body quickly drove the expert pilot into a corner. As the middle demon swept past her neck and began to take over her lower jaw, Venerable Orphan knew that she had run out of time. The false version of herself had been right. Bravado alone was not enough for her to resist the powerful demon that had already taken over most of her soul. Venerable Orphan already knew that this grave invasion had marked her in a way that could not be reversed anymore. Something fundamental had been broken or warped by the demonic invasion. The longer the middle demon took root, the less that the expert pilot would be able to salvage this mess. Despite her dire condition, Venerable Orphan paradoxically felt more alive than ever. Being driven to the point where a demon was literally gnawing at her soul had forced her to not only confront her many failures and shortcomings, but also use these truths as the basis of her conviction. I am not weak. Chapter 7239. Rosa Orphan's Conviction. Chapter 7239. Rosa Orphan's Conviction. Confronting the truth hurt. When the false version of herself used the images of herself and other Larkinsons to put Rosa Orphan down, each point of criticism was grounded in truth. The impact they had on her mood and confidence had been severe enough to push the expert pilot to the brink of giving up her life and existence. This was how much she cared and how badly she was affected by her own failings. Yet Rosa also realized that there was far more to life and fighting than fixating on her weaknesses. All of those failings represented just one side of the coin. She refused to believe that she was able to become an expert pilot and make it up to this point without having her redeeming factors. At this critical situation, she knew what she had to do in order to remove the final obstacles to breaking her bottleneck. She had already completed the first step by honestly acknowledging her weaknesses. However, the next steps mattered even more. What were her strengths? I am not the strongest, toughest, or fastest pilot, but I can be good enough in all three. I am one of the most well-rounded champions of the Larkinson clan after Joshua. Venerable Orphan offered versatility. She was able to fight against a wider variety of opponents and only really had trouble with enemies that remained at a distance. As long as she was able to get close enough, she could rely on the riot's defenses to withstand accurate attacks, and make use of its mobility if the enemy preferred more hard-hitting strikes. Combined with her not-so-trivial offensive power, the expert pilot had always taken pride in being able to scrap and duel against many powerful opponents. Yet this was not a proper description of her strengths as an expert pilot. What was her greatest advantage? Every high-ranking mech pilot was unique. My greatest strength is my persistence. I will never give up. I will always keep fighting. Though Rosa very clearly ignored her previous state, she believed with all of her heart that she was the gutsiest of all of the champions of the Larkinson clan, compared to Venerable Janzi, who constantly had to think about how to block or mitigate incoming attacks. She might even have to make the difficult call to retreat in order to prevent her bastion from crumbling apart entirely. Venerable Orphan, in contrast, did not put nearly as much thinking into her actions. She had often received complaints and criticisms regarding her irreverent behavior, but as far as she was concerned, she was making a positive difference. She responded to potential threats faster than her peers and was not afraid of engaging in a disadvantageous matchup. No matter how powerful the enemy may be, as long as she could make a difference, her honor demanded that she try her best. The value of this mindset could not be overstated. In a war where heroes and gods became increasingly scarier and more lethal, possessing the guts to confront the alien monstrosities without reserve was exactly what many mech forces needed. This realization also gave Venerable Orphan enough clarity when it came to her conviction. She discovered that unlike many of her fellow peers, she did not possess a strong calling for protecting human civilization or the Larkinson clan. It would be false to claim that she cared as much about the Larkinson clan as Dice and Janzi. Try as she might, she simply couldn't bring herself to match their patriotism and dedication. That was okay. Venerable Orphan was her own person. She no longer felt the need to maintain a pretense of being just as loyal as the other champions anymore. There was room for many people in the Larkinson clan. So long as she maintained her obligations to the Larkinsons and met her contractual obligations, she would still remain useful to the clan. That was enough. The truth was that Venerable Orphan cared a lot more about herself. She admitted it. She was selfish and self-centered. She still cared about the people around her, but her incessant need to prove herself and keep up with the best of the Larkinson clan was a reflection of how much she obsessed over herself. She wanted to become strong, not in order to rule over red humanity or reshape the red ocean in her image. No, her goals were not so grandiose. She simply wanted to become the strongest. Yes, really. It sounded like such a simple and juvenile goal, But perhaps not everything about Rosa Orphan had grown up. Perhaps the only addition he could make to that goal was to have fun while doing it. She had spent too many days wallowing in her feelings of inferiority. Those were not good times. Rosa Orphan became resolved to face the future with a more optimistic mindset. If she was weak, then she needed to push herself harder. So long as she did not give up on herself, she would always be able to close the gap between herself and her ultimate goal. This led her to formulate her true conviction for the first time. The careers of many mech pilots are beset by accidents and opportunities. It is difficult for us to survive all of the crap that the universe throws at us. Those who rise above the occasion are not always the prodigies or the blessed ones. Sometimes, a lucky bastard like me gets to earn her place among the greats. I will do everything in my power to become a god pilot no matter what is wrong with me. Everything. I will even make a pact with a demon if that is what it takes to come out on top. I fear nothing. Before the demon could press its attack and rely on its demonic strength to devour what remained of Rosa Orphan's willpower, the Prophet's Bane was suddenly taken aback when an explosion of willpower originated from what little Rosa Orphan retained. I thrive in chaos. Venerable Rosa Orphan was no more. Saint Rosa Orphan had come and taken her place. As the former expert pilot finally triggered her long-awaited second apotheosis, a mutation immediately occurred. Due to the mechanics of the blood pact as well as Rosa's far-reaching state of demonic possession, the barriers between the two began to blur. Both the Prophet's Bane and Rosa Orphan found that they had lost control over themselves and became subject to the vagaries of the powerful breakthrough process. Nobody could ever imagine that an expert pilot would be crazy enough to break through while most of her soul had already been devoured and partially assimilated by a potent middle demon. This resulted in an unprecedented situation that the progenitors of mechs had never foreseen or planned against. Despite the anomalies, the second apotheosis event was such a violent and overbearing process that it forcibly executed its steps without making any special adaptations in reaction to the new and unexpected variables. As Rosa Orphan's extraordinary willpower exploded in both quantity and quantity, it also began to merge with her original soul, as well as the parts of herself that had already been occupied by the Prophet's Bane. The latter suffered a lot more than the former. Due to how much the middle demon had conquered just before the breakthrough moment, it was being subjected to much more changes. The problem was that the demon was not a mech pilot and was not compatible with the changes wrought by the second apotheosis event. Only the parts of himself that he inherited from Venerable Orphan responded best to the current situation. Much of what originally defined the Prophet's Bane melted and got repurposed. The powerful transformation process did not care what the middle demon was supposed to be. The birth of a new saint was set in stone. The transformation could not be stopped. It took everything the Prophet's Bane had to preserve his core identity and do his best to hastily adapt to the changes. It had already suffered a lot when it was forcibly democasted into a very different form inside the Riot Mark III. Now, the Prophet's Bane found himself unlucky yet again when the second apotheosis event forced him to contort into another shape. It was all too much for the middle demon. He was mad to begin with, but he grew absolutely insane after being forcibly remolded to support Rosa's rapidly growing willpower. The soul of Rosa Orphan practically turned into a cauldron. Fueled and stirred by the energies released upon a second apotheosis, the delineation between the two became a lot weaker as they got mixed up by all of the profound changes. Both the Prophet's Bane and Rosa Orphan instinctively understood that they were merging into a single being. Naturally, neither of them wanted this to happen, so they tacitly agreed to stop fighting against each other in order to do their best to preserve their identities and sense of self as much as possible. Try as they might, the domineering breakthrough event repeatedly tried to break their resistance in a single-minded determination to follow a rigid set of instructions. I will not let chaos erase my existence. While Rosa relied on her ballooning willpower to cling to the pieces that belonged to her, the Prophet's Bane relied on its own demonic powers and its foothold inside the Riot Mark III to navigate the storm. Neither of them knew what would become of them, but they knew that they had to go all out in order to make it out alive. From the outside, the breakthrough event was obvious. After so many minutes had passed without anything happening, all of the observing mech designers became shocked when it finally happened. The resonance meters beeped in alarm as they measured the birth of forced resonance that immediately exceeded the limit of an expert pilot. 70 lavares, 80 lavares, 90 lavares, Alexa called out in shock. The numbers keep rising. Rosa Orphan is finally undergoing her second apotheosis. Gloriana meanwhile stared at the machine beyond the transparent screens. What is happening to our mech? VS pulled his attention away from the telemetry and observed the Riot Mark III. Under its restraints, the exterior of the mech rippled as if it was a surface of a lake. Superdimensional Archemetal shook and deformed as if an invisible god was squeezing it from all sides. Though the Riot Mark III quickly bounced back into shape, it was still a disturbing sight. As Rosa Orphan's breakthrough continued, the expert mech slowly began to generate a Saint Kingdom. While it started off weak, VS could also sense a hint of threat from its expansion. It lacked control. Rosa Orphan's condition must not be good for her to lose control over her own domain field. This put the Tarask under threat. The vessel immediately initiated an emergency lockdown to safeguard her many systems. Eject! Gloriana immediately called. Don't teleport away the riot. Just toss it into space. We can worry about the rest. She made the right call. VS could no longer care about protecting confidentiality as the Riot Mark III turned into a danger that was too powerful to suppress. When Rosa Orphan earned her sainthood, she was supposed to use her willpower to get everything under control. VS never thought that she would be able to become so strong, yet still remain unable to control her own power. Both VS and Gloriana activated the same ejection command. The deck below the center of the workshop turned into a gap. The machine immediately sank into it after being pushed by the gravitic instruments of the warship. Seconds later, an emergency hatch blew open and ejected the brand new superdimensional Archimech into open space. The Blue Jay fleet had already implemented countermeasures to obscure long-ranged observation, but none of these methods were perfect. The energy signature of the Riot Mark III affected by forced resonance was too strong to block through these measures. Chapter 7240, Horrendous Consequences. Chapter 7240, Horrendous Consequences. Rosa, can you receive this transmission? Answer me. What is your current status? The telemetry from your mech is all over the place. We don't know what is taking place inside the Riot Mark III. Please tell us whether you are all right. Saint Rosa Orphan's breakthrough was anything but standard. The mech did not make any move, yet its exterior kept rippling and morphing as if it was on the verge of triggering a massive physical evolution. Yet there was another powerful force or multiple forces that prevented the machine from succumbing to madness. A breakthrough from expert pilot to ace pilot should never generate so many concerns. Expert pilots already possessed excellent control over their machines. Their boundless confidence fueled their extraordinary willpower, which granted them excellent mastery over themselves and their mechs. Becoming an ace pilot strengthened these traits beyond all previous limits. A saint was regarded as a pilot who managed to rise far above mortals because they were able to leverage the power of mechs much greater than others. To witness a breakthrough event unfolding where the Riot Mark III not only refused to make a single move, but also appeared on the verge of triggering uncontrolled mutations, meant that something was terribly amiss. Was it the D-Mech? Had the Prophet's Bane thrown a spanner in the works? Or had the demon successfully devoured Rosa Orphan and broken through in her stead? All of these answers may be possible. VS briefly shifted to the data that was supposed to report the state of the Riot Mark III's energy reserves. They were fluctuating. They claimed that the Riot Mark III possessed a 5% charge in 1 second, and 17% in the other. The numbers kept rising and falling as if the mech suffered from 1,000 glitches. While it was easy to dismiss these chaotic readings as junk data that did not reflect the actual state of the Riot Mark III, what if this was not the case? What if Rosa Orphan's Saint Kingdom was able to bend reality to the point where it could actually recharge the Riot Mark III's energy cells? This was a level of reality distortion that VS had never witnessed from a junior ace mech. But this was not a normal breakthrough. With the addition of a powerful middle demon, who knew how much stronger Saint Orphan's breakthrough had become. Not only that, but forced resonance was different from true resonance. Whereas the latter was always the product of control and synergy, the former was produced by an excess of powerful energies. This was normally good as it enabled an expert mech to briefly wield the power of an ace mech in advance. But that was not the case this time. The latest ace pilot of the Larkinson clan was undergoing a distorted breakthrough. Her willpower may not reflect her actual conviction. Certain extreme emotions may have overpowered her more temperate ones. This temporarily turned her into an exceedingly powerful threat. The Blue Jay fleet was on guard. The 30 Ascended Giants were already prepared to launch into space and work together to subdue the Riot Mark III in case it went out of control. While the superdimensional mech was specifically designed to counter phase lords among other enemy types, it was unlikely to suppress so many human phase lords at once, especially if the latter was equipped with a handful of superdimensional gear and employed proper teamwork. Besides, VS had deliberately kept the Tier 3 Destroyer Spear away from the Riot Mark III to limit how much damage the expert Spearman mech could do by itself. While the Riot Mark III could technically penetrate spatial barriers and easily punch holes through phase lord raiments by relying on its full superdimensional Archimech frame alone, it was not able to physically overpower so many Ascended Giants when they all held onto its limbs. The question now was whether the Riot Mark III was about to go on a rampage and whether it received the maximum possible resonance empowerment from the newly expanded Saint Kingdom. "Do we need to deploy, sir?" The Divine Spear asked as he had inflated to combat size and donned his raiment. The Strategos did not care whether he was speaking to VS or the Dark Apostle. "No. Please stand by," VS responded. I think the appearance of so many ascended giants may provoke the Riot Mark III into lashing out. Remain out of sight. Let this event play out. I believe that Rosa would never allow her machine to harm her comrades. Seconds passed by as many more people observed the Riot Mark III without comprehending what was taking place. Red Humanity gained a new ace pilot. This was a cause for celebration, yet more and more people grew concerned whether Rosa Orphan measured up to the standards of St. Tusa and St. Dice. The Riot Mark III did not make any triumphant actions. It did not blaze in glory and exultation. It simply hovered silently in space while its new Saint Kingdom uncomfortably settled over its rippling mech frame. Slowly but surely, the upheaval died down. The anomalous fluctuations dropped in intensity while the Saint Kingdom grew weaker but more stable. VS had the sense that after a lot of exertions, Saint Orphan may have finally seized control at the cost of expending herself. Soon enough, the Saint Kingdom winked out while the Riot Mark III steadily powered down. Rosa, please respond. What is your condition? Do you need rescue? The dormant mech remained completely unresponsive. After a brief delay, both VS and Gloriana ordered a retrieval crew to tow the dormant expert mech back to the Tarrasque. They did so carefully while performing as many scans on the machine as possible. The riot has changed, VS stated when the machine had finally been returned to the shielded workshop. The Prophet's Bane is in a weird condition. How so, VS? I cannot describe it. I have a strong feeling that we can obtain all of the answers so long as we open the cockpit and examine St. Orphan's condition. Is she okay? I don't know. I do not believe she has died, but she was definitely affected by unknown complications. We can only take a look to be certain. After a bit of hesitation, VS chose to enter the workshop to open the cockpit of the new machine himself. Gloriana and Alexa stayed behind in the control room for safety reasons. As VS flew closer, he could feel more and more that the Riot Mark III possessed a different feel than before. It was as if he was confronted by a mech that had been broken down and remade, but still maintained the same appearance as before. The cockpit of a high-ranking mech was not that easy to open from the outside. It was bad design to give enemies an opportunity to make use of this backdoor to strike directly at the mech pilot. However, search and rescue teams still needed a way to get inside if anything happened that demanded immediate retrieval. This was especially important for a superdimensional mech that was nearly impossible to breach through mundane means. Given that a D-mech posed a much greater threat to its mech pilot than ordinary machines, VS believed it was best to implement this safety measure. Of course, VS had made sure to make the emergency unlocking process as convoluted and difficult to manipulate by enemies as possible. He had to waste more time than necessary and leverage the strength and control of a phase lord in order to finally get the hatch to open. Just as VS was about to dive inside the cockpit and remove an unconscious and unresponsive ace pilot from her seat, he froze in astonishment. What is it, VS? What are you seeing? Why are you not pulling out our new ace pilot? Gloriana questioned her husband. Your body is in the way of our external optical sensors. Step aside and let us see. VS looked confused, but did what he was told. As his body moved away, enough of an opening appeared for Gloriana and Alexa to view the interior of the cockpit at an angle. While the perspective was not the best, the sensors were still able to observe the dreadful state of Rosa Orphan. Both female mech designers grew speechless. Am I seeing this correctly? Is this real, or an illusion? It is real, Gloriana, VS slowly answered. I can tell that it is real. Her body, how? We still know too little about D-mechs and the Carmine system. We especially do not know anything concrete about what happens when we combine the two. Now we know what might happen. VS and the others grew increasingly more horrified when a new reality stared in their faces. As if to rule out any possibility that this was an illusion, VS cautiously entered the cockpit and reached out to touch Rosa Orphan's nearly inanimate body with a gloved hand. He touched her flesh, which had largely grown dark and gray as if her body had undergone a demonic transformation that failed to complete. He touched the surface of her helmet. The superdimensional hard materials had partially melted and deformed to the point where bits of metal and composite materials had merged into the flesh and bone of Rosa Orphan's skull. He touched the parts of her body and piloting suit that ordinarily pressed back against the surface of the piloting chair. All of it had been fused together. The boundaries between the three had seemingly faded, causing them to blend to the point where Rosa Orphan's body had partially sunk into her own chair. This was a horrendous sight that would have killed any other person. Yet VS confirmed with his own eyes and senses that the new ace pilot was not only alive, but in a stable condition. She was incredibly exhausted, and her new blood packed with the Riot Mark III was unusually strong and active. But VS confirmed that the worst-case scenario had not come to pass. So long as Rosa Orphan was still alive, then there was still hope for recovery. However, VS immediately guessed that it was not so simple to separate man from machine this time. The biomechanical components of the Carmine system had merged so deeply into her body that separating one from the other had become a nightmare of a challenge. The piloting chair was the interface of the Carmine system, so when Rosa Orphan's body integrated into the object, harming one would harm the other. They could not dismantle the piloting chair for fear of threatening the health of Rosa Orphan's mortal coil. I think we have no choice but to call in the meshers, Gloriana said. This is beyond our capacity to solve. You are right. Please inform Vector Loban. He needs to take a look at this himself. VS continued to remain in place as the meshers finally received permission to step inside and examine the latest and most abnormal masterwork mech produced by the miracle couple up to this point. The pair had developed plenty of weird machines, but the Riot Mark III definitely broke a new record. Well, you have certainly strayed far beyond the boundaries of mech design, Vector concluded. I wouldn't worry too much about the repercussions. Everything can still be explained away so long as the pilot lives and the mech remains functional. If the new ace pilot wakes up and declines to file a complaint, then we can still sweep this unpleasantness under the rug. I see. Thank you for your help. The transhumanist faction has already gained much analyzing this anomalous machine. We value novel data, and your Riot Mark III has defied normality in every way. We can significantly advance our understanding of mechs by analyzing this precious data. Chapter 7241. Transhumanist Miracle. Chapter 7241. Transhumanist Miracle. At this point, VS no longer cared too much about letting the meshers crawl all over his new D-mech. While he still refused to provide any answers related to demon casting, the experts of the Red Association were not stupid. They could fill in a lot of the blanks without requiring any verbal explanations. VS could only sigh and accept this consequence as the price of a partially botched breakthrough event. He continued to ponder about what exactly went wrong. This anomalous outcome shouldn't have happened. St. Rosa Orphan should have broken through directly, broken through late or died without ever fulfilling her dream. From what VS could gather from all of the clues, St. Rosa triggered her second apotheosis awfully late. In fact, the most likely theory that could explain why she botched her breakthrough was that she had triggered it when she was on the verge of losing herself forever. She had lost much of herself to the Prophet's bane. The two had become so entangled with each other that it became difficult to treat them as separate entities. If that was the case, then much of the anomalies that occurred during the abnormal breakthrough event could be explained. VS awaited the feedback from the members of the transhumanist faction. Out of all of the factions of the RA, the transhumanists should be the most accepting of what has happened. Their expertise also happened to be highly relevant to the current case. After several hours of examinations and consulting with research groups over highly encrypted communication channels, Professor Vector Loban finally returned to VS and Gloriana in order to disclose their preliminary findings. Despite their exhaustion and desire to recharge their mental faculties, the miracle couple could not bring themselves to call it a day when they had produced an unprecedented accident. They needed answers. VS and Gloriana needed to know that despite what had occurred, they had not condemned the new ace pilot to a life of suffering, mutilation, and isolation. Seeing the optimistic expression on Vector's face already provided a lot of reassurance. The transhumanist liaison wouldn't smile if the worst-case scenario had occurred. First of all, congratulations for earning your latest masterwork certificates, Vector announced to the pair. The issuance of the certificates will be much delayed this time. Our faction will try to rush it as quickly as possible, but the sheer amount of anomalies that we have ascertained during our initial examination will make that difficult. I do not expect that these objections will hold out for long given our strong support and the fact that you are a Tier 2 galactic citizen. Despite everything that happened, the Riot Mark III is still a masterwork mech. What others consider imperfections, we prefer to view it as a noble experiment to promote the evolution of the human race. We cannot condemn a sincere attempt to break the status quo. His words fit the goals and ideology of the transhumanist faction. VS grew a little more reassured when he heard that the transhumanists were willing to expend political capital in order to back him up and sweep any potential problems under the rug. Will there be any follow-up investigations? Gloriana cautiously asked. That cannot be avoided, Vector admitted. The Riot Mark III is an unprecedented fusion of man and machine, mech design and cultivation science, superdimensionality and spirituality. Your machine intersects so many advanced technologies and theories together that it is a crime against humanity to leave it unstudied. We have already applied to assign a permanent multidisciplinary research team to monitor its condition and track its changes over time. We will also include medical professionals who are primarily tasked with keeping your new saint's mental and physical state as healthy as possible. That was the price for receiving the backing of the transhumanist faction. VS did not even bother to argue this arrangement. He knew that he and his clan simply did not possess the tech or expertise to take proper care of Saint Orphan. His wife did not have a problem with this deal either. She was grateful that the meshers finally stepped in and accepted the responsibility of taking care of the ace pilot. At this point, Gloriana cared little about the riot. VS had twisted it so much that her sense of ownership in the expert mech had plunged. The D-mech carried so much of his fingerprints that they had almost entirely overlapped her own touch. About Saint Orphan. Her condition is complex, but relatively stable as far as we can ascertain. Vector responded to Gloriana. We do not expect that her life is in danger in the short term. We are not so certain whether that will remain the case in the medium and long term. We have already determined that we cannot separate her body from the piloting chair that she has partially fused with. Doing so will lead to grave consequences for both the physical and metaphysical health of the pilot. Vector activated a projection that showed a highly detailed wireframe model of the cockpit. He highlighted the piloting chair that still contained Rosa Orphan's body. The results of the latest deep scans provided an inside look of what was happening beneath the exterior. Both VS and Gloriana's expressions grew grave when they observed how intricate the fusion between flesh and machine had become. The piloting chair might look like a chair, but it was actually a highly sophisticated machine that contained part of both the neural interface and the Carmine system. It also contained a lot of systems designed to cushion the pilot's body against extreme forces and protect it against shrapnel and other hazards. As you can see, there is no neat and simple line that separates the body of Rosa Orphan from the structure of her piloting chair. Vector patiently explained. The components that serve many different functions such as projecting an Azure energy shield, inertial dampening, wireless neural interfacing and conducting the blood exchange function for the Carmine system have melded into her body. Each of these components have undergone strange mutations that have not only made them compatible to Saint Orphan's human body, but also integrated it into the mech to the point where it is no longer a discrete existence anymore. That means? From a purely functional perspective, Rosa Orphan's body has turned into an extension of the mech. It has become as deeply integrated as the Carmine system itself. To sever the body from the mech is like removing an essential system from the riot. A mech will no longer work if we remove the power reactor or the engine from the machine. We believe that a similar circumstance is at work here. It may not seem obvious, but we calculate that there is a 85% probability that the Riot Mark III will become completely inoperable and Saint Orphan will likely perish upon trying to sever the two by force. Gloriana took this news especially hard. She considered the current situation to be a huge failure on her part. A mech was meant to serve the pilot. It was not designed to devour its user. How do you know? She skeptically asked. Why is your confidence level so high? You only studied our machine for a handful of hours. The transhumanist mech designer grinned in response. That is because we have conducted many experiments over the centuries that have produced similar results. Do not misunderstand us. The similarities are not strong. We have never conducted an experiment involving novel elements such as superdimensional alloys, Architect and the Carmine system, but the combination of all of them has produced an outcome that has provided us with a vast amount of data and inspiration. By comparing new results with old results, we can deduce many insights and increase our understanding of what it takes to further the evolution of humans through mechs. VS had spoken with transhumanists enough times to become aware that they conducted a large amount of taboo experiments. The more radical members of their faction was perhaps the most eager to overthrow all of the overly restrictive rules that restricted their research. The Great Severing had conveniently cut the RA transhumanist faction off from the oppressive chosen human. Now that they had embraced the leadership of the much more tolerant and forward-minded evolution they became much more open about conducting experiments that previously would have brought them to trial. The transhumanists were so obsessed about their grand ambitions that they did not even bother to hide their past transgressions anymore. VS could only imagine what kind of sick experiments they conducted in the past that resulted in humans becoming permanently stuck to their mechs. In the instances that have resulted in an undesirable and suboptimal integration between man and machine, forcibly severing the corpus of the mech pilot from the physical structure of the mech has resulted in death or functional death 100% of the time. Vector seriously said. That revelation caused alarm to both VS and Gloriana. If the figure was accurate, then there was not a single success case. Do you know why? She asked. Yes, but only loosely. Our theories are not yet fully able to stand up to scrutiny, but we hope that our examinations of your Riot Mark III will change that. In short, the fusion goes beyond the material. The metaphysical components of the mech and mech pilots have fused as well. If you separate one but not the other, then a terrible consequence will occur. The soul of the mech pilot will not only remain behind in the machine, but the absence of the old human body will trigger a catastrophic consequence. What happens? Mech pilots below the rank of god pilots are still human, at least in part. Vector seriously said. What happens is similar to what happens if we completely digitize the brain of a human. He will lose his humanity and turn into a rigid machine. More egregiously than that, we have broken the anchor of a human soul to such a severe extent that it has become broken. A broken vessel cannot adequately accommodate a human existence. The precise outcomes are different depending on the specific cases, but none of them are good. The most merciful outcome is that the disembodied human simply dies in an instant or disappears in silence. The less merciful ones are those where the pilots suffer great pain as their souls slowly crumble apart or steadily become subsumed by the machines that they have fused with. There are other unpleasant outcomes as well. In short, bad stuff happens if VS and Gloriana rashly attempted to remove Saint Orphan's body from the Riot Mark III. Even though her body was in a weird and awful state, it still served as a vital anchor for Saint Orphan's continued existence as a living human being. Do not feel too bad about it. Vector tried to reassure the pair. This experiment of yours is still a relative success in our opinion. Your attempt could have easily produced much worse outcomes. Saint Rosa Orphan can still regain her human body while she is at least somewhat alive and functional. We may not be able to do so through surgery or other methods, but she herself possesses the power to move past this transformation and gain control over her own form. Do you understand what I am referring to, professors? Gloriana failed to connect the dots, but the same could not be said for VS. You are talking about the road to no return, the ultimate steps that every ace pilot needs to complete in order to complete the ultimate breakthrough. VS steadily answered. From a more charitable perspective, you can say that Saint Rosa Orphan has already completed several steps of the mech-body merger process in advance. This unconventional transformation combined with the formation of the Blood Pact means that our new ace pilot has potentially completed the first step, the second step, and the third step. Potentially. Doesn't that mean that Saint Orphan only needs to complete one more step before she can make the ultimate breakthrough? There is a small possibility that you are correct so long as her resonance strength has reached the limit of her current rank. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.